Chapter 209. The moment Gu Nan stopped moving, a presence came from behind him. It was Duanmu. Senator Duanmu San's real body looked serious, but his eyes looked more serious. They looked more lively. On the other hand, Gu Nan seemed to have expected this since the moment Duanmu's son appeared. His figure had already vanished once more and teleported behind Duanmu's son instead. Duanmu's son moved faster. He turned around and threw a punch. Although he was in a hurry, it was not like he did not see the fight. Unfortunately, his punch still hit nothing because Gu Nan had no intention of making a move at all. Gu Nan merely used him as a springboard and immediately flashed out of the door. He ran away. Duanmu's son frowned. Gu Nan jumped up and down and disappeared from his sight. He did not understand. His opponent had come to kill so many people, but he did not do anything substantial. He just killed a bunch of people and then ran away. As for the loss of his people, Duanmu's son did not feel bad about it, but he did not care too much either. The lifespan of a break world person was too long. They were just normal people. After a few decades, they could raise a few more generations. Why should he care? Even Duanmu Yin and his daughter did not rush to take revenge, even though they knew that she was killed by Gu Nan. Instead, they chose to take their time to think about it. Nianlan, are you okay? Duanmu Nianlan shook her head. The wound on her shoulder was not light, but it would not affect her ability to fight. She was more concerned about the changes in the enemy. Duanmu Nianlan was very competitive. Including this time, she had lost to Gu Nan twice. Between break world people, there were no clear levels. It all depended on their skills and how they performed. Everyone had the possibility of beating someone else. But that Gu Nan had too many tricks up his sleeve. If the first time was about absolute power, using his body to fight his God Path Goal body, then the second time was about extreme skill. In such a high-speed fight, every sword hit the same spot. If he was not an elite who had been practicing the sword for many years, how could he do that? Father, do you think that person purposely lured us out? Duanmu Nianlan tossed aside her thoughts and immediately thought of this possibility. The enemy deliberately lured out the two break world people. It looked like they had some other goal. It's very possible. Duanmu's son had thought of this as well. However, he suddenly said, "Be careful." As soon as Duanmu's son shouted, she realized a barely visible shadow had risen behind her. The shadow quickly condensed into a saber and gave off a strange aura as it stabbed into Duanmu Nianlan's back. From a king, the blade of the divine soul. It was the same wound. Only now did Duanmu Nianlan understand why Gu Nan was so insistent on inflicting a wound on her body. The divine Dao golden body could defend against the divine Dao saber, and they both restrained each other. But what if there was a gap in the divine Dao golden body? Now, Duanmu Nianlan knew the result. The divine soul blade pierced through without any obstruction, accurately hitting Duanmu Nianlan's divine soul, causing her to freeze on the spot, her pupils suddenly becoming slack. It was just one strike, and Duanmu Nianlan was injured like never before. The divine soul blade in Gu Nan's hands was even stronger than the divine Dao golden body. The divine soul blade in the hands of Gu Nan was stronger than the divine Dao golden body. When Gu Nan took over the Shadow Servant's ability, the effect was naturally more terrifying. Duanmu Nianlan felt her vision go black. Her body started to go soft. She felt like she was going to fall to the ground. But her mind was very clear. From the moment Gu Nan showed up, every move he made was clearly displayed in front of her eyes. He used a sneak attack to inflict a wound. He used that weird sword skill to enlarge the wound and divert her attention. His sword was very strong. If he could hit a weak spot, he might be able to severely injure her. Because of that, she did not protect her shoulder very well. Otherwise, she would not have been hit repeatedly. Instead of forcing him to attack her weak spot, it was better to let him attack her shoulder. But when she thought he was going to accumulate injuries, he suddenly left. She and her father thought he was trying to lure her away. However, before he could finish his thought, the final killing move appeared. Divine Soul Blade. The Divine Soul Blade had to hit the golden body's weak spot to deal the most damage. Unfortunately, her body had just been hit with a weak spot, These chaotic thoughts kept echoing in Duanmu Yinlan's head. She felt her eyelids grow heavier. Facing a near-death injury, even a world breaker could not do anything. In the outside world, Duanmu Yinlan's golden body of the divine Tao was quickly fading away, revealing her original form, a young girl dressed in ordinary clothes. With a sweep of her figure, the young girl's body landed in Gunan's hands. Well, now we can have a good talk. Gunan smiled at Duanmu's senator. Duanmu's son looked at him with a dark face. Where is your family's grave? Near planet Huaqiong, there were many secret fleets gathering in space. They surrounded the place. We have arrived at planet Huaqiong. Is the starship ready? Gold Clothes stood in a starship. She looked emotionless as she asked the man in front of her. She was a world breaker. She had the power to stand in space, but the man in front of her could not. He was the captain of the starship. He was only in the nuance level. Mister, all the starship paths have been locked down, the captain politely replied. As long as it is a starship, it will not be able to leave this region safely. Starship paths were limited in space. You cannot just pick a random place. That gave others the possibility of locking them down. But the captain was careful. He said, as long as it is a starship. What he meant was, if the other party was a world breaker, then their lockdown would be a joke. World breakers could travel between planes. What was the point of locking down the region? Gold Clothes understood what he meant. She impatiently waved her hand. She was a world breaker elite. How could she not know this? She was certain the other party was heavily injured. He could not withstand the pressure of tearing space. If he wanted to leave, he had to go through the starship. That was why she was doing this. It was just like when Gunan locked down the heavily injured Luo Fei. Every dog had its day. Now it was his turn. You guys just wait here. If any starship dares to leave, stop them all. Gold Clothes said in an overbearing tone. Countless starship went in and out of planet Huaqiong every day. Because of her words, they were all going to stop. That was the power of Shanghai Pavilion. Let's go. Zihe was already waiting. When the starship's lockdown circle was set up, the two of them left immediately. They headed for planet Huaqiong. The two of them had lived in the central system for hundreds of years. They did not need to lead the way like Gunan. They headed straight for the Duanmu family. It was a shame what they saw was a ruin. Chapter 2:10. What exactly are you looking for? Duanmu Sin's face looked gloomy. He could not suppress the anger in his voice. If his daughter was not in a man's hands, he would have punched him. Break world elites rarely cared about family, but this daughter was different. Anyone who raised a break world class child would treat her like a treasure. Shadow Song. Do you know this name? It should be something, Gunan said. He looked at the Duanmu father and daughter with interest. One was next to him, and the other was on his shoulder. The two of them looked like normal people. Perhaps the ones who went out on missions were just their clones. No. Duanmu's son suppressed his anger. I can take you to search the ancestral grave, but can you let me see my daughter first? He did not forget that Duanmu Yinlan had been injured by Gunan's God Soul knife. He did not know if she was alive or dead. She could die at any moment. Gunan shook his head. If you want your daughter to be safe, find what I am looking for. Gunan was not stupid enough to give up his bargaining chip. He did not even want to let Duanmu Yinlan leave him. Rule powers were not safe enough. They could be cut off by someone else. Only an evil god body could make Gunan feel safe. He could ensure he could kill Duanmu Yinlan at any time. Duanmu Sin's forehead was full of blue veins. He angrily said, I do not know what Shadow Song is. If you're looking for something, just take it. What ancestral grave? The Duanmu family had not buried anyone in there for a few hundred years. They did not even have someone to clean it. It was just a decoration. What era was this? Burial had long since ceased to be popular. Divine Tao cultivator clans, even more, so had their own burial methods. Even if the Shadow Song he was talking about was a treasure, so what? Could it compare to the daughter of a break world elite? Duanmu's son was telling the truth. He wanted Gunan to find what he wanted and leave. Gunan said, oh, he kept searching. It was not like he wanted to waste time. It was just his habit to be careful. As a professional gamer, he was bound to be meticulous when doing quests. But unfortunately, even after Gunan carried Duanmu Yinlan around, he still didn't find any clues. There was nothing that resembled Shadow Song. Even though Gunan held one item after another in his hand, the evil god's temple didn't give him a notification. This meant that they weren't Shadow Song. What could it be, right? Gunan suddenly remembered that he seemed to have forgotten a very useful person. Shadow power flashed in front of him, and a figure quickly took shape. It was a young and beautiful girl, but as a shadow servant, her skin was a little dark. It's really you. Duanmu Sin's eyes burned with anger. This was his other daughter, Duanmu In. Even though he had some expectations, he still couldn't take it well when he personally witnessed his daughter being killed and even refined into a puppet. Luckily, it wasn't the most important one. Duanmu's son could only comfort himself. As long as there was hope of saving Duanmu Nianlan, he wouldn't turn against her so easily. This is the Duanmu family's ancestral tomb. Do you have any memories of Shadow Song? Gunan asked. Duanmu In had been refined into a shadow servant by him. She retained a portion of her memories from when she was alive, and many of these memories came from Purple Will. Purple Will had used a wisp of her soul to possess Duanmu in order to lure him to the Duanmu family's ancestral tomb. Did she know anything about Shadow Song? I don't know anything about Shadow Song. Duanmu In shook her head decisively. This meant that she had no recollection of this word. But then she said, but I think I know how to get to this place. The Duanmu family's ancestral tomb was indeed in a sorry state. Gunan's first attack was fine, but when he fought with Duanmu Nianlan, they both used the power of laws. Just the shock waves were enough to destroy everything around them. Zihe and Jean both had ugly expressions on their faces. The Duanmu family's ruins were like a huge slap to their faces. Actually, it wasn't just the problem of them being late. The Duanmu family's current state indicated another possibility. His injuries might not be that serious, and he might still have enough battle strength. Otherwise, how could he have attacked the Duanmu family? How could the Duanmu family's two divine path cultivators just sit back and watch as their family's base was destroyed? It might not be Gunan. Jean was silent for a long time. Finally, she found a reason and said, perhaps the Duanmu family just happened to meet an enemy. Even she herself didn't believe this reason. However, Zihe agreed. That's right. Let's search first. The reason wasn't important. What was important was that they had already come here. If they were scared away without even seeing the enemy, how could they still have the face to do that? They had used such a large force to surround Jade Flower Planet. It was impossible that the pavilion didn't know about it. Tacitly acknowledging the two's mischief was actually a form of compensation. If they went back with their tails between their legs, then they could forget about revenge in the future. Gentlemen, may I ask if this is the Duanmu family? A voice came from behind them, causing them to turn around in surprise. It was a very ordinary-looking girl. Regardless of her cultivation level or anything else, there wasn't the slightest bit of abnormality. However, the fact that she had asked such a question here was already very strange. Who are you? Why are you looking for the Duanmu family? Jean and his companion looked at each other and asked coldly. My name is Zhou Jinwen. Zhou Jinwen felt like a huge rock was pressing down on her heart when Jean stared at her. Even breathing was difficult. Her rationality told her that she could not reveal the existence of a senior. However, that indescribable pressure made her speak the truth uncontrollably. It's a senior. What kind of senior? Jean interrupted her before she could finish. A senior with only half a head. Just as Zhou Jinwen arrived outside the Duanmu family and coincidentally bumped into Jean and his companion, Gunan brought the father and daughter of the Duanmu family to a strange place. Shadow servant Duanmu did not bring Gunan to any place in the ancestral tomb. Instead, they went to the entrance. More accurately, they went to the ground at the entrance. Boom! As Gunan smashed his fist down, a huge hole instantly appeared in the ground. It was indeed hollow. Dim moonlight shone into the hole. Gunan sent Duanmu in a scout. Soon, they confirmed that there was no danger inside. However, there was a 12 or 13-year-old girl. When Gunan saw this girl, his pupils involuntarily constricted. He had seen this face before. Who are you? The girl's beautiful eyes were wide open. Her common language was a little shaky, as if she had not spoken for a long time. "What's your name?" Gunan did not answer her question. Chapter 211. My name is Shadow Song. As soon as he said this, Gunan subconsciously checked his evil god's temple, but there was still no notification of completion. Why was this happening? This question only lingered for a moment. As a professional player, Gunan quickly found two possibilities. Either the girl in front of him was lying, or she was indeed called Shadow Song, but not the Shadow Song he was looking for. He turned his gaze back to the girl, Shadow Song. From the first moment Gunan saw her face, he knew that she was definitely a very important person. Her face was almost identical to a person's. No, more accurately, it was half a person. That was the left side of Zwazwa's face. This girl who called herself Shadow Song was like Zwazwa, who had taken the left side of his face and made a complete person out of it. Why would Purple will bring him here to find someone who was clearly related to Zwazwa? And what was the purpose of that woman called Red? These two thoughts flashed through Gunan's mind for a moment. Then he tossed them aside. He had no interest in the NPC's schemes. He only cared about his own quest. It's still up ahead. Duanmu Yin's voice sounded in Gunan's ear, causing him to tremble. He raised his head and saw that there was a silver coffin behind the little girl. Gunan couldn't be bothered to think too much about it, but that didn't mean he couldn't see through some things. This Shadow Song wasn't what Purple was looking for. She was looking for this coffin. As for Shadow Song, was it that woman called Red? Gunan began to realize that he was involved in two quests at the same time, one from Purple Will and the other from Red. The two quests had different objectives, but they had a common point: the Duanmu family's ancestral tomb. Gunan didn't think any further. He carried Duanmu Nyinlon and walked quickly to the silver coffin. He lifted the coffin lid with a wave of his hand. There was a corpse lying inside. Naturally, the coffin was for a corpse. It was an indescribably handsome man. He looked to be in his mid-30s, the perfect age for women of all ages. It was unknown how many years he had been buried here, but not only did his appearance remain the same, even his skin showed no signs of decay. However, this handsome uncle's image was ruined by one thing. There was a crescent-shaped dagger stabbed into his heart. Gunan had been doing quests for so many years, it was impossible for him to not have the ability to think. It was clear that the machete was what he was looking for. He raised his hand and was about to pull out his scimitar when two exclamations came from behind him. "No, please don't." The first voice belonged to Duanmu's son, and the second voice belonged to Duanmu Yin. Gunan's hand stopped at the moment he grasped the scimitar. He did not immediately pull it out. He turned around and asked why. The two of them seemed to heave a sigh of relief at the same time. Duanmu Yin quickly said, "In my memory, if I pull out that scimitar, something bad will happen." A shadow servant's memories were constant. They would not recall more, nor would they forget. Duanmu Yin could not remember the purpose of the purple intent, but she remembered that she could not pull out the curved blade. Duanmu's son was still a human, so his memories were unstable. After all, this was the Duanmu family's ancestral tomb. Seeing this scene, he finally remembered some things. You must not pull it out. Once it's suppressed, the blood ancestor will revive immediately, Duanmu's son said solemnly. Blood ancestor? Gunan looked at the handsome uncle, then turned his attention back to the evil god's temple. There was still no notification. He was almost certain that the scimitar in front of him was Shadow Song. There were two ancient characters on the blade, and he could still vaguely make out them. However, the evil god's temple still did not declare that he had completed the quest. There was only one possibility. In the game, the completion of a quest could not be described in words. For example, the quest Find XX was also described in words. One quest only required the player to see the target, while the other required the player to collect it. Clearly, the criteria for this quest were more stringent. Even if Nan had the target in his hands, the quest could not be considered completed. Seeing that Nan was silent and hesitant, Duanmu Yin, who was a shadow servant, did not feel much. However, Duanmu's son became anxious. The blood ancestor is a great demon from 10,000 years ago. Legend has it that he is as immortal as the stars. He must be a Star Lord if, before he could finish speaking, Gunan had already pulled out the scimitar. Dwanmu family head's face turned pale. Gunan could not help but shake his head. On one side was a super demon that would cause chaos in the world, and on the other was his quest. What did chaos have to do with him, Gunan? With the machete in Gunan's hand, the evil god's temple was finally shaken as he had expected. Quest completed. Find Shadow Song. Total sin points, 300. Seeing this short sentence, Gunan's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. 300 sin points. Even if he was already at the 4th level, even if the quest reward was related to the difficulty, even if, no matter what, this was still too much. No matter what, Find Shadow Song was not a difficult quest. Even without Red's notification, Gunan would have found out sooner or later that the Dwanmu family was involved. Cheong Flower Planet was only so big, and the incident was triggered here. The Dwanmu family strength was not much. If it was not for the fact that Gunan wanted to save time and effort, he had better methods. Whether it was sneaking in silently or killing the Dwanmu father and daughter first, it was not too difficult. So what was the meaning of such an excessive reward? The evil god's temple could not be wrong. Gunan was very clear about this. Therefore, according to his experience, this kind of abnormal reward often meant a possibility. This was an advance reward with some additional difficulty after the quest was completed. The uncle in the coffin began to move. First, his fingers, then his arms, and finally his entire body. He slowly sat up, opened his eyes, and calmly scanned his surroundings. Blood ancestor. Dwanmu's son couldn't help but call out. He was already accumulating energy, his divine Tao golden body condensing behind him, ready to attack at any moment. Gunan was in no hurry to attack. Instead, he asked, "You are?" "I'm Violet Lightning." The handsome uncle flashed a friendly smile at Gunan. "Did you save me, little brother?" "Thank you very much." Dwanmu's son was startled. This person's serious expression did not seem to be faking it. Gunan nodded, then turned to look at the little girl, Shadow Song, and said expressionlessly, "Then you are?" "Thank you very much as well." A charming smile appeared on Shadow Song's face. At some point in time, she had changed her clothes. She was wearing a blood-red cloak with a cape on her back. Even her hair was blood-red. Chapter 2:12. The ground at the entrance of the ancestral tomb suddenly fell silent. Dwanmu Sin's originally tense nerves seemed to suddenly freeze. He looked at the uncle who called himself Violet Lightning, then at the little girl, Shadow Song. He should call her the blood ancestor, Shadow Song. "Then you can go," Gunan said as he handed Dwanmu Nianlan to him. Dwanmu's son took his daughter in a daze. His gaze wandered back and forth several times before finally stopping on Shadow Song. The blood ancestor, bang! Gunan viciously punched him in the temple, sending him and his daughter flying out of the cave entrance. "You talk too much." Gunan glanced at the cave entrance and curled his lips. If it weren't for the fact that divine cultivators were too tough, he would have already hacked the father and daughter to death. But there was no benefit in killing them now, so Gunan couldn't be bothered to do it. "What a violent man," Shadow Song muttered. It was none other than the crimson-robed Shadow Song. After Gunan dealt with Dwanmu's son, his gaze also shifted to Shadow Song, his cold gaze faintly revealing a hint of danger. "What? You want to fight me?" Shadow Song raised her head. "It seems that you still don't believe me? Then why don't we try?" Before she could finish speaking, a shadow suddenly appeared in front of her. Judging from its posture and speed, it didn't seem to have any intention of showing mercy. Shadow Song didn't seem to be able to react at all. Her entire body swayed, and she almost fell over. But the shadow didn't hit her. A figure had already appeared in front of her. With a wave of his hand, he broke through Gunan's law of shadows. It was the handsome uncle, Violet Lightning. With just this one attack, the situation on the battlefield became much clearer. Shadow Song was just bluffing. At the very least, she didn't have the strength to match the name Blood Ancestor, but Violet Lightning did. Not only could he easily block Gunan's attack, but he also clearly had a close relationship with Shadow Song. "Are you all right?" Violet Lightning leisurely turned around and looked at Shadow Song behind him. His movements were too calm. without the slightest hint of nervousness. It didn't look like he was worried, but more like a lover flirting, or in short, a public display of affection. Shadow Song pursed his lips and shook his head. He didn't look too happy. He's so rude. Can you kill him? I'm afraid that won't work. He's very powerful. Uncle Purple Bolt similarly shook his head. Then should we hurry up and run? Shadow Song hesitated for a moment before replying. It's too late. There was a helpless look on Purple Bolt's face. His target is you. Gunan gripped his curved blade, Shadow Song. His gaze never left Shadow Song's body. This was enough for Violet Lightning to understand. The two of them talked as if there was no one else around, but Gunan did not interrupt them. The reason was simple. Professional players had to be able to clearly distinguish which dialogue could be skipped and which could be related to quest clues. Even Gunan was curious about the identity and relationship of these two fellows. Someone asked me to protect the owner of this blade, Gunan said as he tossed the curved blade in his hand. Gunan's quest was already over, but according to the usual pattern of criminal incidents, he could still obtain some resources from the vicinity of the incident. And the one that would most likely benefit him was undoubtedly the reward that Red had mentioned. This little girl named Shadow Song could bring him to the Starry Sky Path. The dungeon system that Gunan hadn't opened in a long time would most likely fall into her hands. On the other hand, the exorbitant reward from the criminal incident could very well mean that there was a hidden danger. He needed enough information to resolve it. Violet Lightning was slightly taken aback. A trace of seriousness appeared in his eyes. It seemed that the person Gunan had mentioned made him extremely wary. Meanwhile, Shadow Song suddenly became lively, completely different from her previous obedient appearance. So you're here to be my bodyguard? A moment later, she saw Gunan's figure suddenly disappear. This time, not even Violet Lightning could stop him. He was simply too fast. The super high priority of Lightning Strike made all restrictions on the level of laws useless. Teleportation was true teleportation. Gunan appeared behind the girl. He placed his hand on the back of Shadow Song's head, and then there was a series of pleas. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Please let me go. It's all my fault. Shadow Song didn't even gasp for breath. Then, she turned around and looked at Gunan with tears in her eyes. Gunan ignored her expression. He gently grabbed her and pulled her in front of him. You can enter the Starry Sky Path. Gunan's voice was calm, but his meaning was clear. For world breakers, the Starry Sky Path was no longer a mysterious term. If they were lucky enough to become a Star Lord, they could enter. What was the Starry Sky Path? It could be understood that there were countless planes and astral worlds in the world. There was a place that was like a center or a core. Only divine souls could enter this place, and only Star Lords who had completely constructed their own laws could enter. The Starry Sky Path had dots of light that corresponded to each plane. These dots represented a world. If they could control the origins of these worlds, the Star Lords could truly control the world and become the true master of the astral worlds. This was why the Starry Sky Path was called the Center. In other words, the Starry Sky Path was the Star Lords' hunting ground. It was used to capture planes. Gunan didn't know how the Star Lords obtained the origins, but from the few times he had experienced the Starry Sky Path, he could tell that it was related to the mission mode. Before, Cho and Ran, Zwazwa, and Purple didn't show any doubts about the mission. That meant it was normal. Yes. Shadow Song pursed her lips and didn't say anything. This time, it was Purple Lightning who answered for her. She wants to recover her power. She needs the world origin. Oh, can you take me there? Gunan wasn't sure what he needed, so he could only ask ambiguously. What will happen if we refuse? I'll beat you to death. Purple Lightning shrugged helplessly. It looks like there's no way to refuse. Then, before we become teammates, can you let us test your power? This uncle was very polite, even in a situation like this. Yes. Gunan nodded. He was about to test it out with Purple Lightning when the 300 sin points appeared in his mind. So the words that came out of his mouth changed. Let's see who can kill faster, Gunan said as he pointed outside the cave. Chapter 213. Under the night sky of the Duanmu family's ruins, Gold Clothes and Z, he finally arrived. They were carrying Zhou Jinwen. They were in front of the big hole in the ancestral grave. It was not because they were good at searching. It was just that it was too obvious. Not only was the hole so deep that they could not see the bottom, but there was also the shadow rule movement. For these two world breakers, it was like a light in the dark. This is it. Gold Clothes looked down with a serious face. They guessed Gunan might still be able to fight. They were much more careful than before. They were even prepared to run if something went wrong. No matter how important their reputation was, it was not as important as their lives. Look after her. Jean E pointed at Zhou Jingwen and said, Gunan left a nomological imprint on her. She might be of use. They had discovered the little black sword Gunan had left for Zhou Jingwen. World breakers could not simply give a rule mark. Every world breaker could only give a limited number of marks. They did not think Gunan would use it. Z nodded to show he understood. Zhou Jingwen was being carried by Zi He. She looked wronged as she stood next to the two of them. Her tears were about to fall. She was just a normal student. She had worked so hard to find the Duanmu family and then come here. It had not been easy for her. But before she could find where the elder was, she had not received any benefits. She had been caught by these two people. Even with Zhou Jingwen's eyes, she could tell they were the elder's enemies. Little Zhou wanted to cry. If she knew this was going to happen, she would have sold out Gunan. It would have been better than this. The elder was being chased like this because these two people were stronger than him. Zhou Jingwen's mind was running wild, but before she could finish her thoughts, she found that the situation in front of her had changed. A purple light came out of the big hole. It went straight for Gold Clothes, who was next to her. At the same time, a shadow appeared behind Z. A heavy punch was silently coming for the back of his head. Zhou Jingwen, who was standing behind the two of them, saw everything. She felt that time seemed to slow down, and she suddenly had a lot more time to think. But in reality, she didn't have time to think about anything. This unequal battle from beginning to end ended in an instant. Zihe, who was targeted by the heavy punch, was no different from his comrade, Lan Pe. His head exploded with a single punch. The golden robe man was even stranger. The purple light tore through the void and flashed past Jin Yi's body. Then, she seemed to be frozen, and her entire body stopped moving. Under Zhou Jingwen's astonished gaze, Jin Yi's body slowly split open from the middle. He was split into two and fell to the ground. Hearing, touch, smell, everything in reality began to return to Zhou Jingwen's body. The strong smell of blood made her nauseous, and she heard a strange conversation. One move. Me too. The power of breaking magic. Swordsman. Zhou Jingwen did not understand the meaning of the conversation, but it was enough to clearly express Gunan and Purple Lightning's intentions. The duel between the two sides was a draw, because both sides only used one move. Speed did not matter. What followed was a discussion of each other's abilities. The power of breaking magic was too rare, and Purple Lightning was not too sure. Gunan, on the other hand, was very sure of Purple Lightning's abilities. He was a swordsman, a pure swordsman who had nothing to do with laws. It could also be understood that all of his laws were sword laws, and they contained all the characteristics of a sword. Swiftness, sharpness, and so on. At this moment, Gunan finally understood what the warning of 300 sin points meant. If you're to fight Purple Bolt now, there was a real possibility that he might die. It was not because of how powerful Purple Lightning was, but because of his sword. His sword had already been in his coffin, sleeping with him for tens of thousands of years. There was a saying that swordsmen nurtured their swords. Purple Lightning had used his coffin to nurture his sword for tens of thousands of years. When he came out of seclusion, how earth-shattering would his sword be? Fortunately, Jin Yi had taken a hit for him, and Purple Lightning seemed to be more than willing to have another teammate. Perhaps there was also the red factor. It's just that there's a bit too much damage. Gunan looked behind Jin Yi. There was a sword scar over 1,000 meters long, and even the ground had been cut half a meter deep. With this kind of sword force, even if 10 Jin Yi stood together, they would still be cut down. When do we leave? Gunan asked directly, not thinking any further. This was all he cared about. In 3 days. Purple Lightning stood beside Gunan, slowly sheathing his sword. We have some matters to take care of. Purple Lightning and Jean had just woken up, so it was normal for them to have some trivial matters to take care of. Gunan nodded in understanding. Then we'll meet again in 3 days. Take this as collateral. He waved the curved blade in his hand, and without waiting for Purple Lightning's reply, he disappeared. Shadow Song was naturally very important. He wasn't afraid that they would go back on their word. Violet Lightning and Shadow Song were definitely hiding many more secrets. For example, what was the relationship between Purple Lightning and Purple Will? Why did Red want Gunan to protect Shadow Song? Why was Shadow Song stuck in Purple Lightning's heart? Why was Shadow Song so weak? Gunan wasn't interested in any of these tongue-twisting questions. Who had the time to care about the backstory of an NPC? Hey, Purple Lightning called out helplessly. Of course, he didn't get a response. Since you don't mind, I'll accept this girl. She's a good seedling. He turned to look at Zhou Jingwen, a smile appearing on his handsome face. Beautiful lady, are you interested in learning the sword? Gunan returned to the world of immortals and demons. This was his preparatory divine kingdom. He hadn't had the time to come back before. Now that he had 3 days of free time, he naturally had to come back and take a look. With a batch of shadow servants brought back from planet Xinhuang, the construction of the divine kingdom sped up significantly. These shadow servants from the Starseed Pavilion were far beyond Yin Xiaoxiao's imagination, be it in terms of standard or the diversity of their abilities. She cannot be more satisfied. In a year at most, the structure of the two alliances will be completely established. When Gunan asked about the progress, Yin Xiaoxiao said excitedly. Her excitement wasn't common, but it was a good thing for Gunan. This meant that Yin Xiaoxiao had found a new goal. It also meant that the construction of the divine kingdom wouldn't fail her. This strange girl seemed to have pursued power since she was young, not power itself, but something that came with power. She used to be addicted to killing people because she wanted to control the lives of others. When she took charge of Blue Dragon Hall for more than 20 years, this goal became even more clear. Not bad. Gunan nodded with satisfaction. Start the dual screening mechanism within the two alliances. The ranking system can also be implemented. Yin Xiaoxiao expressed her understanding and asked, do first-class people need any special symbols? Chapter 214. Players had come up with many ways to build a divine kingdom, all with the same goal, to cultivate strong people with the highest efficiency. From Gunan's understanding, there wasn't a single best plan, only the most suitable plan for the divine kingdom. In other words, the divine kingdom had to be designed according to the national conditions. For example, in a society where the feudal system had disappeared for a long time, there would be great resistance to implementing a hierarchical system. Of course, killing could be used to eliminate opponents, but this would cause too much damage to the population, which was obviously not a good choice. However, it was different in the immortal and demon world. This was a feudal era, and the concept of all men are equal had not been popularized, so it was much easier to classify humans. Do people have to be ranked according to their strength? Although she had understood Gunan's ranking system, Yin Xiaoxiao was still a little uncertain. Gunan nodded. Bloodline, talent, wealth, all of these can be converted into power, and we only look at the final result. Those who don't know how to cultivate can learn. Those who don't know how to develop their bloodline can learn. And those who don't know how to spend money can learn. All information is free to the public, as long as they can learn it. Transcendents are first class, innate beings are second class, acquired beings are third class, and ordinary people are fourth class. Within each class, there are 3 ranks according to the proportion of people. Proportion of people? The first 10% are third class, the next 10% to 30% are second class, and the rest are first class. Then we need to do a census of the entire continent. Yin Xiaoxiao suddenly gasped. She knew how much work it would take. Ancient societies like the immortal and demon world rarely did census, especially during times of war. Coincidentally, Yin Xiaoxiao had done something similar in the Northwest, and the amount of manpower and resources that had been invested had shocked even Yin Xiaoxiao. And what Gunan said next made her eyes widen even more. That's right. Not only do we need to do a census, we need to do it every day, and it has to be accurate to every single person, Gunan said calmly. Every city will be divided into districts, and each district will have no more than 500 people. A shadow servant will be in charge, and the number of people will be counted every day. Yin Xiaoxiao frowned and lowered her head to consider the feasibility of Gunan's words. Many problems could be avoided with the shadow servants who were never tired, unafraid of death, and absolutely loyal in charge of the statistics. The city-state system was the foundation of the population statistics. What they feared the most when doing statistics was people wandering around, and the city-state could minimize this situation. What if someone doesn't report? Or maybe some people really can't register. You are allowed to apply for leave, but you must report in advance. There is also a time limit. Gunan said lightly. Special cases can be treated differently. Those who deliberately don't come will be sentenced to death. It was not an easy task to plan a completely new social system. Just like that, Gunan and Yin Xiaoxiao discussed and analyzed every possible loophole before coming up with a suitable solution. There had to be some omissions, but it didn't matter. Gunan had enough time and foundation to get used to it. If there was a problem, he would solve it. As long as he had enough power, no one could overthrow his rule. After discussing the entire hierarchy, Yin Xiaoxiao finally had some understanding of the world that Gunan had described, but she felt a chill in her heart. Teacher, I feel. She hesitated for a long time before saying, Are you treating humans like animals to be reared in captivity? Whether it was counting the numbers or cultivating them in a specific direction, these were all methods that would only be used in artificial breeding. Gunan clapped his hands and said happily, It's great that you can understand. The appointed time with Violet Lightning was 3 days later in the astral realm. If it was the immortal devil world, it would be about a month later. During this period of time, Gunan had also taken some time to sort out his gains during this period of time. Ever since he had advanced to the 4th level, he had been trying to increase his strength nonstop, fighting for the immortal devil world, heading to the Jade Flower planet. All these were for the sake of advancing to the 5th level as soon as possible, or even completing his first job transition. Gunan had never forgotten that there were still gods in this world. He had to at least complete his first job transition in order to have the ability to protect himself in front of them. Now that the immortal devil world was in his hands, Shanghai Pavilion's strength seemed to be stronger than he had imagined. So naturally, he had to focus on increasing his strength. Shanghai Pavilion did not have what he needed, so what was the point of fighting to the death there? Red said that Shadow Song could enter the Heaven Star path, so she was Gunan's next target. After completing the search for Shadow Song event, Gunan's Sin value had already reached 1350 points, and Lan Si's progress had slowed down again. His points were even more pitiful. He was only left with a mere 150 points, and the rest were all used to construct the Resurrection Law. If he had enough points, when Gunan had faced Yu-Gi-Oh, Duanmu's son, and the others, he could have changed a few skills to deal with them. Unfortunately, he did not have the money, and with 1,500 points of Sin value, he could construct the 3rd law, which required a large number of points. The private instance dungeon is too unreliable. Up until now, there hasn't been another one in the White Fog. Thinking of the private instance dungeon, Gunan was furious. Back then, he had been excited for a long time, but he did not expect that it was completely a blind cat finding a dead mouse. After so long, there was still no second one. Today, Gunan was no longer the ignorant transmigrator of the past. His guesses about the nature of the instance dungeon were getting more and more, and they were getting closer and closer to the truth. Before Gunan came into contact with plane travel, he could directly receive quests from the evil god's temple. It was no different from a game. However, ever since he left the Langya world, such a quest had never appeared again. It all depended on Gunan's own reincarnation and search. After reaching level 4, the translated world quests seemed to have lost their effectiveness. At least, Gunan did not receive any external quest import notifications. The evil god's temple was just an inanimate object. Gunan had every reason to believe that he had triggered some sort of mechanism that had caused such a change. The 36 heavens and 72 boundaries might be fundamentally different from other small worlds. After reaching level 4, the essence of life is sublimated. It's also fundamentally different from before. Gunan easily found the key turning point. Next, it's time to explore the heavenly star path. Gunan had a strong premonition that perhaps he could find the answers to these questions one by one in the heavenly star path. He did not make Gunan wait for too long. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. When Gunan returned to Jade Flower Planet, Violet Lightning and Shadow Song were already waiting for him. What surprised him even more was that there were not just 2 people waiting for him. There was a third person. This is also our teammate. The handsome uncle was still very polite. I heard that you already know each other. Miss Wugue? Chapter 215. As the reincarnated Buddha, Wugue didn't have much enmity with Gunan, but their relationship wasn't that good either. She was originally the reincarnation of an ancient powerhouse who wanted to reincarnate and become a Buddha. However, she was interrupted by the heavenly secret path master and forcibly awakened in the 9,000th life. This caused her to be unable to obtain the Buddha's true body from her previous life. She even changed from male to female. Everything was fixed in this life. Of course, for people at this level, gender didn't matter. Later on, she wanted to borrow Zhu's teachings to merge her Buddha and demon, but Gunan intercepted her. This was the start of the conflict between the two. What are you looking at? Do you want to fight? Facing Wu Gui's gaze, Gunan stared back without hesitation. In any case, Curved Blade Shadow Song was still in his hands. He wasn't afraid of falling out with her. However, to his surprise, the young girl, no return, calmly withdrew her gaze. Since that person appointed you to protect the current blood ancestor, you naturally have your value. Wu Gui's words caused Gunan to raise his eyebrows. From her expression, she clearly knew about Red's existence as well as its identity. Let's go, Purple Lightning said. The more valuable planes in the all-heaven star path require at least 4 people. His last sentence seemed to be an explanation to Gunan as to why he had to bring Wu Gui along. Gunan couldn't help but laugh when he heard that. This was clearly a multiplayer dungeon setting in the game. Apart from player-made maps, the official maps mostly required 4 people or more. 4 people was the minimum requirement to complete a mission. For example, Gunan's private dungeon, Splendid World, required 4 people to enter. Shadow Song nodded lightly and took a step forward. With a serious expression, she said, "Stand beside me. Later, don't resist the light beam." Gunan and the others stood still. Shadow Song closed her eyes slightly, and an indescribable light shone from her body, gradually enveloping everyone. Gunan felt a light coming from an endless distance, and his body involuntarily began to float. This was not an illusion. It was indeed his body that was moving, not just his soul. So, the celestial star path isn't in this space. Gunan looked at the gradually opening spatial crack in front of him and said with a hint of understanding, "It's in the inner world." The person who discovered it called it the inner world, so we followed suit. Inner world. This was the first time Gunan had entered this place with his real body, but the scene was not much different from before, balls of light and spots of light. The light orbs represented the Devata realms, and the light spots. Now that he thought about it, they were probably the Star Lords. There were at least tens of thousands of light spots here. Thinking about it this way, it was really a very scary thing. Gunan and the others couldn't move. Shadow Song was carrying them forward. Soon, they were thrown into a ball of light, and their vision returned. This was a strange plane. The entire world was pitifully small, almost the size of a city, and it was clearly divided into 2 sides. There was a camp on each side, and the 2 camps were connected by 2 black and white roads. "World of Heroes," Shadow Song said as soon as he entered this plane. "Number 652, it's ranked near the back. Looks like our luck is not bad," Violet Lightning said with a smile as he looked at the entrance of the camp. There was a number plate there. Young lady, no return frowned. Clearly, this was also her first time here. She and Gunan were considered newcomers, so Violet Lightning said, "There are about 2,000 World of Heroes in total, and those ranked after 500 are considered less competitive. Haven't you been sealed for a long time?" How do you know this? Gunan looked at the two strangely. Young Lady No Return said, time is nothing to a Star-Lord. 10,000 years is just a snap of the fingers. If you want to improve, you'd better get used to this. She used to be one of the real big shots, so she didn't really care about Gunan's current strength. Gunan shrugged. You can go snap your fingers, then come back and see if you can still stand in front of me. Gunan, who had only been in the world for a few years, had the right to say this. All right, all right. Seeing that No Return was starting to glare, Violet Lightning had no choice but to mediate. The world of heroes is a confrontational mission, so it's not easy. Don't fight amongst yourselves. As if to verify Violet Lightning's words, a blood curtain began to fall from the sky, just like what had happened to Gunan last time. Mission objective: destroy the enemy camp's crystal. It was just a simple sentence without any further hints. Meanwhile, the senior Purple Lightning was still trying his best to explain to Gunan and Yi Lingxin. The world of heroes is a rather special world. As you can see, the final objective is to destroy the enemy camp's crystal, but in the process, we have to try our best to kill the enemy's heroes. Wait a minute, heroes? Yes. Here, we are called heroes, and the enemy will be 4 heroes from other places. This is where the name World of Heroes comes from. Gunan looked at him with a strange gaze, then looked at the 2 camps and the 2 paths. We are currently at the lowest level, so we can level up if the nearby enemies die, and we can get money if we kill enemies with our own hands. Isn't that right? Gunan said quickly, as if he was the experienced one. How did you? This time, Violet Lightning was a bit stunned. Although there were many World of Heroes, not everyone had come here before. Even the young girl, No Return, hadn't come here before. So how did Gunan know? Was he the reincarnation of some almighty being? Gunan looked at him and knew that his guess was correct. What World of Heroes? It was simply a MOBA type of map. MOBA games were very popular. In his previous life, there were naturally many such maps, but due to various reasons, not many people played them. After all, to consider the balance of both sides was much more difficult than simply designing a mission map. What about the equipment? What about the skills? After confirming the map, Gunan began to ask hurriedly. To play a good MOBA match, the most important thing was to understand the skills of both sides, as well as the equipment that could be chosen. Looking at the 2 paths that didn't connect, it was obvious that there weren't many strategies to speak of. As long as it was a game, as a professional player, Gunan would never back down. Let alone competitive games. Even if it was whack-a-mole, he was much better than the average person. Wait, what's going on? The young girl, No Return, finally couldn't take it anymore. She didn't want to participate in the battle and confusion and end up being the one to hold everyone back. Shadow Song put away the scimitar that Gunan had returned to her and said, The World of Heroes starts with 2 days of preparation before the battle officially begins. That's enough time for you to familiarize yourself with this place. But before that, we're going to walk around and see if we can catch a few restless kids, Violet Lightning added. What do you mean? No Return was even more confused, but the 2 of them had already disappeared. Chapter 216. World of Heroes. Gunan walked in his own campsite, his gaze calmly sweeping across the surroundings, and he would occasionally ask the people in the campsite about something. That's right, there were natives on both sides of the World of Heroes camps, and their numbers were quite high. Just like the 2 roads that connected the camps on both sides were also divided into black and white sides, marked by a crystal high up in the middle of the camp. Compared to the games in Gunan's previous world, this World of Heroes was much more honest. If it was a crystal, then it was a crystal. At this moment, Gunan was standing in the middle of his own camp. In front of him was a huge white crystal, as tall as 20 people, embedded in the ground. You mean, the 2 of them went out to look for enemies to attack. Young Lady No Return stood beside Gunan, a thoughtful expression on her face. Along the way, she didn't really understand Gunan's actions at first. Since he knew that his companions had gone out to fight, what was the point of staying here? But as the conversation with the natives deepened, No Return quickly realized that something was wrong. This plane had a very special law, completely different from what she had seen in her previous world. First, they didn't fear death. They were called heroes, and after death, they only needed to wait for a period of time to revive in the Fountain of Heroes. Secondly, their goal was to destroy the enemy's crystal and only to destroy the crystal. Any other actions like killing and stealing were to serve this purpose. Finally, if they wanted to increase their strength, there was only one way: to kill the enemy. The last hit requires money, otherwise, only experience. Do you understand? Gunan asked the NPCs one by one, and at the same time, said to No Return casually. Right, don't be in a hurry to learn skills. You can decide according to the type of enemy, Gunan said again. Girl No Return's face darkened a little. Don't tell me you've learned it already? What a pity. Under Gunan's nagging, Girl No Return's face didn't look too good, but she remained silent. She was a powerful person, so she still had this bit of willpower. There was a skill system in the world of heroes. Every hero had 2 passive skills, 2 active skills, and 1 ultimate skill, for a total of 5 skills. According to Gunan's evaluation of his own skills, these skills did not appear randomly. Instead, they were based on the participants' own abilities. For example, the 5 skills that Gunan possessed were all abilities that he already possessed. The 2 passive skills were Shadow Power and Body of the Evil God. The 2 active skills were Flash Strike and Shadow Sword Overlay, and the ultimate skill was Justice Judgment. Among them, Shadow Power was a fixed passive skill, which meant that it could not be added by a hero. It could only be slowly leveled up along with the player's level. On the other hand, Body of the Evil God was similar to the 2 passive skills. It could be upgraded. This wasn't much different from a MOBA games in Gunan's memory, but there were some adjustments to the details to make it more suitable for the Star Masters. From Gunan's point of view, this was undoubtedly a balance mechanism of the world itself to prevent the difference in strength between the Star Lords from affecting the strength of both sides. Even though realms could be limited in the inner world, there were still differences in the amount of power an individual could possess, so it was necessary to distribute them uniformly. Gunan did not ask what the skills of No Return were. This Buddha most likely still had some fear in his heart and would not tell him frankly. Besides, he didn't have time to care about this. He was busy asking the NPCs one by one. Hello, may I ask what you have here that you can sell to me? I'm selling melons. Can your melons recover HP? What are you talking about? Hey, don't eat it. You haven't paid yet. A moment later, Gunan casually threw away an Annie with a swollen face and took a bite of the melons and fruits on her stall, but he didn't find anything special. It wasn't just this Annie selling melons. Almost any native that Gunan could see, any stall, any shop, he had to go in and try them out. As a result, it was a mess. Of course, Gunan had no money, but as a hero, no one could do anything to him. Because there were too many complaints, a camp guard finally came in front of him and said awkwardly, Hero, can you please? What do you want to do to me? Gunan interrupted him rudely. I don't dare. Then what else do you want? After nightfall, I heard that you visited all the shops in the camp today. Purple Lightning looked at Gunan with a smile. He had already heard about Gunan's deeds. Gunan only nodded lightly and turned to say, The 2 of you didn't get anything today either? It seems that the opponents aren't rookies. How do you know? Shadow Song said, The rules of the world of heroes are special. If it's their first time here, it's impossible for them to stay in the camp. As long as someone comes out, they'll be ambushed by you. Gunan said. The girl No Return frowned and said, What if the 4 of them act together? That means that they came prepared. Gunan curled his lips. Even rookies will be told that they can resurrect here. If they aren't prepared, what's the point of staying together? Some of the most basic rules were known by all the natives in the camp, and they could be found out by just asking around. Resurrection was the core rule, but the natives wouldn't say anything about the losses after death. No Return was speechless by Gunan. Fortunately, she was used to this kind of situation and didn't mind. She fell silent again. Shadow Song, who looked like a little girl, jumped in front of Gunan and waved her blood-colored cloak. You haven't told me what you were doing during the day. Her big eyes were full of curiosity. She didn't hide her curiosity about this strange guy, Gunan. Of course, I'm looking for goods that can be used. Equipment, tools, and potions count. Gunan didn't hide his purpose and said casually. Shadow Song and Purple Lightning looked at each other and said doubtfully, "The items in the world of heroes belong to the mortal stage. What can they be used for?" In the world of heroes, heroes like Gunan had extraordinary power in the outside world, even when they first entered the game. This was inevitable because their fixed passive ability was their own rule. Their realm was obviously at least extraordinary, and all the items in the camp didn't exceed the innate level and didn't contain any rule power. How could they help them? However, Gunan just shook his head. It might be useless in the later stages of the game, but it can set up a good start. Gunan's gaze swept across the three of them. His face was full of confidence. Chapter 217. Within the White Camp, in an ordinary hut, there was a constant roar. This was an ordinary household within the White Camp. The three siblings all had the surname Yang. The eldest was Yang Guang, the second was Yang Quan, and the third was Yang Lan. Today was supposed to be the day when the hero had arrived and the entire White Camp was celebrating. However, the Yang family was not happy at all. "This is too much. This is too much." A dignified young man shouted angrily. "Just because you're a hero, you think you can do whatever you want." Beside the young man, there was a young lady with swollen eyes. She stared blankly in front of her. On the ground in front of her, there was a basket of fruits and vegetables. However, every single one of them had been chewed, torn, or bitten. None of them were intact. "Guang, calm down." Another person stood beside the young man, Yang Guang, and was trying his best to persuade him. "His Excellency is here to help us defeat the evil Black Camp. Haven't you been looking forward to the arrival of His Excellency?" The young man who was persuading Yang Guang was more handsome. Unlike Yang Guang, he was more like a scholar. He was the second brother, Yang Quan. "I'm looking forward to it, but Quan." Guang did not know what to say. He could only hit the table angrily. "Forget it." Yang Quan sighed. "It's just some fruits and vegetables. If we can defeat the Black Camp, why will we care about these?" Even the third sister, Yang Lan, spoke up. "Yes, big brother, forget it. Perhaps His Excellency has such a strange hobby." Yang Guang kept a straight face and did not speak. Speaking of which, they were indeed just fruits and vegetables. Compared to the future of the country, they were not worth mentioning. However, to the Yang family, this basket of fruits and vegetables was their livelihood for half a month. Yang Guang and Yang Quan. One was a scholar while the other was a martial artist. They spent their days practicing martial arts and studying hard so that they could contribute to the upcoming war. However, it was also because of this that the family's livelihood depended on Yang Lan's fruits and vegetables. "Now, Guang and I are going to the battlefield soon. There's food in the army. It's just that you have to suffer." Yang Quan smiled bitterly. The start. At this time, it was already 2 days after Gunan and the others had arrived. The battle between the two battalions had already begun, and soldiers were constantly pouring into the black and white battlefields. For Gunan, this meant that he had already sent out his troops. In that case, all we need to do now is to defend? Standing beside Gunan, Girl No Return frowned as she looked at the lines that kept pushing forward. Gunan nodded. In terms of tactical distribution, yes. Between the two camps, there were 2 paths, one black and one white. The layout of these 2 paths was completely symmetrical, but the difference in color had a hidden rule. By standing on a path that was the same color as the camp, he would receive a certain increase in attack power. According to Gunan's tests, the bonus was about 10%. For example, when Gunan and the others were in the white camp and stood on the white road, their attack power would be 10% higher than normal. Whether it was killing or pushing towers, they would be faster than on the black road. On the other hand, the heroes on the opposite side had the same bonus when they stood on the black road. Obviously, this was the offensive and defensive rule that the world provided for the players. Paths of the same color naturally had an offensive advantage. And in Gunan's 4-man team, they chose the most common 2-on-2 distribution. Gunan and Girl No Return would stand on the black road and be in charge of defense. The 2 veterans, Shadow Song and Purple Lightning, would go to the white road with a bonus attack power and attack the enemy. This distribution was very reasonable and even Goonan approved of it. This was because at both ends of the road, there were camps and walls that would automatically attack the enemy. In the early stages of the game, it was very difficult for heroes to pose much of a threat to the walls. In other words, the defending side would definitely have the advantage in the early stages. This distribution was to allow the two rookies to quickly adapt to the rules of the world of heroes. As for Shadow Song and Purple Lightning, their task was to reduce the HP of the opposing wall as much as possible. If you don't know how to play, you can just leech experience. Leave the last hits to me, Goonan said to No Return. Even though there wasn't any equipment that could be bought here, it didn't mean that the last hits weren't important. Money couldn't be used to buy equipment, but it could be used to buy skill points. That's right, skill points here weren't given according to level. They had to be bought with their own money. Apart from the point that they had just arrived, if players wanted to level up their skills, they could only buy them from the Heavenly Law here. In the upper right corner of Goonan's vision, there was a small number. Ever since the game started, it had been slowly rising. This thing was called a hero coin, and the growth rate was about 1 coin every minute. Goonan looked at the number that hadn't changed for a long time and silently calculated in his heart. The troops of both sides quickly came into contact. Goonan and No Return rushed to the front lines. However, it was more difficult than Goonan had imagined to deal the finishing blow. Bang! Girl No Return fiercely struck out with her palm. It carried an astonishing Buddhist and demonic aura as it heavily hit an enemy cavalryman. This cavalryman was only at the innate realm. Even if he had a full set of armor, he should have been dead after taking a hit from Transcendent. However, after he fell from his horse, he spat out a mouthful of blood and got back up as if nothing had happened. Was that a skill? Goonan asked with a slight frown. Yes. Girl No Return's expression didn't look too good. She didn't think that she would encounter such a problem right after killing an enemy. This is probably what they call transcendent suppression. Goonan didn't think too much about it. In fact, Shadow Song and No Return had already mentioned it. In the hero's world, powers above transcendent wouldn't be affected when used on each other. However, when used on people or objects below transcendent, the effects would be greatly reduced. Goonan was also a little puzzled. He knew better than anyone else that this was clearly to prevent players from using their last hits. It was to prevent players from using too much power and directly clearing the line. To put it bluntly, this world used various rules to create a playstyle that was similar to a competitive game. Don't use skills to kill, and don't use skills to attack the minions. I think there's still a limit to your mana, Goonan said casually. Mana? Even though she was used to Goonan talking to himself, No Return still didn't understand what he was talking about. Goonan just shook his head and didn't intend to explain. She would naturally understand once she experienced it herself. At this moment, he pointed forward and said, "They're here." Their real opponents this time, the Star-Lord that had arrived at the Black Camp, finally showed up. It was an old man and a young man. As soon as they showed up, the young man roared excitedly and rushed to the ground. His whole body turned into a ray of light and slammed into one of the white camp soldiers, sending the latter flying. It was a soldier who had already been lightly injured. With this one move, he died instantly. At the same time that the soldier died, a red light shone from the young man's body. Should we make a move? No Return frowned. Even though the opponent was also being suppressed by transcendent suppression, he was clearly more familiar with the battlefield than them. No. Goonan shook his head decisively and pointed to the opposite side. We'll control the line. What do you mean? Chapter 218. Controlling the line was a skill. In almost all MOBA competitive games, there was an emphasis on control of the line. However, the method and goal of controlling the line were different depending on the rules. Goonan was proficient in almost all types of games, and the current situation was no exception. He hovered in front of the line of minions, hovering in midair with the help of the Law of Shadows. He did not make a move and only watched. The old man and the young man could not tell what he was doing. They did not make a move and instead waited. Normally, the battle should be a battle between soldiers and heroes. That was why the young man had taken the time to kill one of the soldiers. That way, when one side was in a bad state and had to retreat or was killed, the other side could help the soldiers on their side and win the battle. You think so too? Gunan asked young girl no return. He found it funny when he heard purple lightning and the young man talk about the strategy. No return nodded and said, "There are celestial kingdoms in the Devata realms. This is how the celestial kingdom wars are fought." Gunan did not deny it. He only said, "The goal of war might be to win, but that's not what we're fighting now." Young girl no return was slightly stunned. Before she could react, Gunan's figure had disappeared and appeared in front of a soldier below. The soldier was already heavily injured and was only one step away from death. Therefore, Gunan used very little force. With a light push, the soldier's head fell to the ground. In the next moment, two figures appeared beside him. They were the old man and the young man. Die! The young man was clearly faster. His body began to emit light again. This was clearly his skill. Movement speed increase, attack bonus, pseudo-charge. Gunan's cold gaze swept across and instantly determined the characteristics of his opponent's light transformation skill. Then he used his mind and instantly learned Flash Strike. His figure instantly disappeared in front of the two and appeared behind No Return in front of the line of minions. The two were clearly stunned, but they quickly calmed down. They were not in a hurry to chase after Gunan. The older one was Star-Lord Mi Luo, and the younger one was Star-Lord Mi Tion. No one would have guessed that they were twin brothers. Ermi was also a veteran player in the Heroes era. They knew very well that they couldn't cross the line of soldiers to chase. Otherwise, they would lose more than they gained. The two camps were filled with soldiers, and they were divided into different types of soldiers. But in the end, they could be divided into close-range and long-range types. Once they crossed the battle line, they would immediately attract the attacks of the enemy archers. Under transcendent suppression, these mortal soldiers could still injure them. Meanwhile, on the white camp side, Gunan could not help but furrow his brows when he sensed the consumption of his troops. Just as he expected, the amount of energy consumed in a single flash attack far exceeded what he had consumed in the outside world. According to this ratio, he could only use Flash Strike 20 times in a row. But in actual combat, other skills also consumed energy, and the number of times they could be used would be even fewer. "Brother, what should we do?" Star-Lord Covering Heaven, who looked to be in his 20s, asked the old man beside him. The twins were 2 generations apart in appearance, but their communication wasn't affected at all. Star-Lord Covering Heaven said, "That person has learned displacement skills, so he won't be strong enough to attack. Let's attack the soldiers directly." Both of them had entered the Heroes era several times, so they were very clear about the skills they could learn. There were 2 active skills and 1 passive skill that they could add points to. It was a configuration of attack, defense, and agility, but it was adjusted according to each person's situation. If the opponent learned agility skills, he would definitely not be able to defeat the 2 of them in terms of attack. Not to mention that they had the attack bonus of Black Warpath. This was equivalent to giving up a wave of soldiers. It was obvious that he was a newbie. The twins looked at each other and sighed in their hearts that they were lucky. Almost in the blink of an eye, the 2 of them began to push the line. Their attacks constantly landed on the white camp soldiers, making these mortals suffer. "Brothers, hold on," a small leader shouted in the formation. He should have added, "The heroes will soon do this and that," but he really couldn't bring himself to say it now. Gunan and the other girl stood quietly on the side, with no intention of making a move. "Are we still not going to make a move?" Young girl No Return looked at the calm Gunan and could not help but ask. In reality, she did not understand Gunan's actions at all, but her rationality told her that he obviously knew more than she did, so he must have a reason for his actions. If it wasn't for this, how could she be someone who would listen to him obediently? "You can make a move, but remember not to attack the soldiers," Gunan said casually. "Attack when they're retreating, so they won't be able to fight back." White Warpath, Shadow Song, and Purple Lightning's current situation was almost a copy of Gunan and the other girls, except that they were the ones pushing the line, while the other 2 were being suppressed by them. Their teamwork is average, probably a team put together at the last minute, Purple Lightning said as he finished off another enemy soldier with a swing of his sword. "Looks like those 2 are going that way." Shadow Song nodded silently. The two of them did not gain much from their previous probing, but it was not that they did not encounter anyone. They encountered a team with great teamwork, but they had only exchanged blows for a moment, so they could not come to any conclusions. However, they could use this opportunity to make a judgment. "I hope they won't be pushed too hard," Shadow Song said in a low voice. With a slash of the scimitar in his hand, a faint layer of blood mist seeped out. In a heavenly star path, her own strength was no longer important. Everything was shaped by the rules of the astral plane, and she still had her knowledge and experience. As she said this, the blood mist that Shadow Song released slammed into the opposite wall, making a sizzling sound. This was her offensive skill, and it had unimaginable destructive power against the wall. Black Warpath. Young girl No Return kept attacking the enemy champions, while Gunan spent most of his time watching the show, only taking time to finish off the dying enemies. Due to their strategy, it did not take long for the line of troops to be pushed in their direction. It was not easy for No Return to attack. There were too many enemies. This wave of troops was made up of black camp soldiers, and they surged towards Gunan like a tidal wave. After this wave of attacks, we might be able to whittle away 10% of the wall's energy. Star-Lord Miluo's wrinkles were almost squeezed together as he smiled. He had never seen such a cooperative opponent before. One only attacked the champions, and the other just watched the show. If this continued, it would not be long before the wall was breached. Once the wall was breached, they would have the ability to directly attack the white camp, which was equivalent to winning half the battle. On the other side, young girl No Return had already retreated to Gunan's side. At this moment, she could only sigh softly. "Let's retreat first. We'll just defend the wall." Chapter 219. In terms of the understanding of minions and finishing blows, there were probably not many people in the entire All-Heaven Star Path who could compare to Gunan. It wasn't that the Star-Lords were stupid, but that they didn't understand this rule at all, and it was even more impossible for them to deliberately study how to play under this rule. Gunan naturally had his considerations when he asked No Return to attack the enemy heroes. He was considering the number and frequency of minions in the hero's world. According to the duo's experience, there were only 6 waves of soldiers a day, and they were concentrated between noon and dusk, so the frequency wouldn't be low. So, under Gunan's deliberate control, by the time Ermi finished pushing the line, the second wave of minions from both sides had already set off and were almost there. Under No Return's astonished gaze, Gunan actually charged straight at the Black Camp army. This time, even the brothers Miluo and Tian were stunned, almost thinking that this guy who had been slacking all this time had lost his mind and wanted to die. After all, they were still level 1, and facing a large group of mortal soldiers would probably kill them in the blink of an eye. Of course, Gunan didn't want to die. He stopped in front of the line of minions with great precision, ensuring that all the enemy troops could see him, but they still couldn't attack him. Next, he made an unimaginable move, activating Flash Strike. Gunan directly appeared behind the Black Camp Army's commander. The army on the other side sneered. "I thought this guy came up with some good idea. A newbie is a newbie." Star-Lord of Heaven was the first to shake his head, not hiding the ridicule in his eyes. Since the other party could enter here, he was naturally a Star-Lord, but they didn't expect him to be so childish. Was he the only one who could think of a mere decapitation tactic? Once he tried it, he would find that the commander was far more difficult to kill than ordinary soldiers. And once he did, but all the soldiers would rebel, and it wouldn't be worth it. However, what the two didn't expect was that after Gunan arrived next to the Black Camp commander, he didn't have any intention of killing him, and instead lifted him up with one hand. The effect of extraordinary suppression was still present, so when heroes faced mortals, their attacks and defenses weren't as exaggerated, but their strength wasn't reduced. Even if Gunan didn't have the body of the evil god, it was still a piece of cake for him to lift a mortal. Therefore, under the dumbfounded gaze of the Black Camp soldiers, Gunan did not kill anyone. He took the commander away. This person, what is he trying to do? The two Star-Lords were equally confused. In their field of vision, Gunan was dragging the commander of the Black Camp in a circle, while the soldiers of the Black Camp kept following behind him. Star-Lord Mi Luo seemed to react. He is stalling for time. Isn't stalling for time helping us? Star-Lord covering heaven could not help laughing, not knowing what to say about this newcomer. One had to know that the second wave of soldiers was about to arrive. Once the two groups of soldiers converged, the offensive would only be more intense, and the consumption of the city wall would be even greater. Yang Guang donned his armor and held a long spear in his hand as he walked on the official road with his head held high. He was very excited. His life's biggest wish was right in front of him, just like how the tall city wall of the camp had appeared in front of him. Although the descending hero was a little unreliable, Yang Guang had temporarily forgotten this point due to the education he received since young. Guang, there's going to be a war. Yang Quan stood beside Yang Guang and said excitedly with the same expression. Yang Guang was almost speechless and could only nod his head vigorously. Quan, hey, look at what's that in front. Just as Yang Guang was about to speak, he saw that on the other side of the city wall, there was a large black shadow flying across the sky. Yang Quan looked over in shock and said after a while, "It looks like, Sir Hero, quick, inform the commander. We have to rush over immediately." The second wave of soldiers arrived slightly faster than Gunan expected, but this did not affect his actions. He led the Black Camp soldiers in a circle and finally threw the Black Camp's commander back. When the second wave of soldiers arrived, the frontline soldiers from both sides stopped just outside the attack range of the city wall. Perfect. After completing this series of actions, Gunan immediately praised himself shamelessly. The young girl, no return, cooperated and said, "What's the use of doing this? With the soldiers being controlled by me, the two opposite sides can no longer attack." Gunan sneered and said, "Follow me." On the other side, Mi Luo and Mi Tian were still unaware. They waited for the soldiers to come into contact with each other again before continuing to push forward. Although they were close to the enemy's city wall, they were still able to attack the soldiers in close range. However, they did not expect that the two heroes would go crazy this time. As long as they dared to attack, they would immediately chase after them. This time, the two of them attacked together, and each time they chased after half of the soldiers, they were extremely arrogant. When the two-star masters wanted to counterattack, the two heroes immediately retreated. However, they could not chase after them. They were still under the enemy's city wall. The two-star masters who were originally in high spirits finally began to experience the disgusting feeling of having their soldiers stuck under the enemy's tower. "So that's how it is. You plan this?" The young girl, no return, looked back at the city wall and suddenly felt enlightened. Gunan smiled and said, "Controlling the line is just a means. Do you know how much money they will lose in this wave?" The young girl, no return, shook her head honestly. However, she did not understand, but Gunan was very clear about it. In a wave of soldiers, each side had about 500 soldiers, and the real valuable ones were about 1/20th of them. Before the soldiers died, a small number of them would be marked by the world. This marking was not obvious, and it required the heroes to observe it very carefully. The last hit of an ordinary soldier was only worth 1 hero coin, sometimes even nothing, while the marked soldiers were worth at least 30 hero coins. The total value of a wave of soldiers is about 1,000 hero coins, and the 25 valuable ones account for 3/4, Gunan said. "I call them marked soldiers." In the first wave of soldiers, the other side missed most of the soldiers in order to push the line. There were only a dozen marked soldiers in total, and they were divided between 2 people. As for me, out of the 16 that have already appeared, I've added 14. The smile on Gunan's face did not change as he pointed to the front and said, "In the remaining lines, we can completely not miss a single one." The young girl, no return, looked between Gunan and the line of soldiers and said, "But if the other side continues to attack the small soldiers, when their next wave of soldiers comes, our city wall will be in danger." Controlling the line was most afraid of the other side, pushing the line brainlessly. Although the young girl, no return, did not understand this, she had extremely rich combat experience and could analyze it herself. "We just need to get rid of one of them." Gunan seemed to have a card up his sleeve. How we do it? Chapter 220. Grab the second was a common saying in competitive games, but under different rules, the word second had different meanings. The rule of the world of heroes was that as long as a soldier died, the nearby heroes would receive EXP, regardless of who killed the soldier. Therefore, the only way to grab the second was to push the line. In fact, when the first wave of the White Camp's line was cleared, the two opposing heroes had already leveled up to level 2. When heroes leveled up, there would be obvious changes to their bodies. Of course, Gunan and Mi Tian would not miss it. Unfortunately, due to Mi Luo's and Mi Tian's terrible last hits, they did not have the money to upgrade their skills. This was a very simple math problem. Upgrading a skill by one level required 1,000 hero coins, and every hero would receive 300 hero coins as a free gift. Therefore, to obtain one skill point, they only needed to earn 700 gold coins. Each wave of soldiers was worth 1,000 hero coins, but a level 1 hero could not kill every soldier, so they could only kill marked high-value soldiers. Ermi could kill about 5 marked soldiers, which was worth 150 hero coins. Including the ones that were given when they left, and when they were free, they only had 500 hero coins on them. What about Gunan? As the marked soldiers fell one after another, the number of marked soldiers he had killed was close to 23, and he had 989 hero coins on him. The 2 marked soldiers that he had missed when he was adapting to the rhythm of the game had already been replenished by time. In front of the White Camp's wall, another soldier was about to die. A faint white light lit up on his body, which was a special mark from the world. Gunan's expression changed slightly. He was quite far away from the soldier, and under normal circumstances, he would definitely not be able to rush over. This was the reason why it was not easy to last hit in the early stages. It was a full 500 versus 500 line of soldiers that stretched for hundreds of meters. It was not controlled by a screen, so how could it be easy to last hit? This was a real battlefield, and it was not an exaggeration to say that everything changed in an instant. However, Gunan had no intention of letting it go. His figure disappeared instantly, and he appeared behind the soldier with a flash strike. This was his last hit, so how could he let go? The power of shadow appeared for the first time, and the shadow sword suddenly appeared in Gunan's hand, which directly cut off the soldier's head. At the same time, Gunan's hero coins jumped to 1,019. Now that he was level 2, he bought a skill point as fast as he could and added it to Shadow Sword Overlay. Shadow Sword Overlay. Cast a Shadow Sword attack, dealing 3 times the damage to the target. This skill can only be used twice within a short period of time. It was just that the first level of Shadow Sword Overlay was obviously not as scary as Gunan's original version, and there was a limit to the number of times it could be used, but it was enough for now. In front of Mi Luo and Mi Tian's shocked gazes, Gunan used Flash Strike to appear behind Mi Luo. Seizing the opportunity, Gunan did not choose to use a skill immediately. Instead, he stabbed his sword at Milo's back. Gunan's movements were too sudden, so Milo didn't even have time to react until the sword stabbed into him. The moment the tip of the sword pierced through, Gunan finally used Shadow Sword Overlay. There was no need for Gunan to move. His body seemed to be controlled by some kind of power. The sword that he stabbed out was instantly retracted, and his arm stabbed at Mi Luo again. Only this time, the shadow sword was layered like a shadow in the air and slashed heavily on Mi Luo's back. Originally, it was impossible for Gunan to retract his sword and appear again so quickly, but he cleverly used a rule of the world of heroes. The skills here were generated by the world, and not controlled by the heroes themselves. In other words, the heroes only needed to click on the skill, and it would automatically be used. This was also a means to balance the Star Master, but now it was used by Gunan to cancel the backswing of the sword, to reset the general attack. Mi Luo, the old Star Master who was hit twice, finally couldn't help but roar. He quickly turned around, and the long sword in his hand was about to slash at Gunan. But Gunan's movements were faster than him, as if he had expected it. He used Flash Strike on the enemy in front of him again. This Flash Strike did not cause any displacement, but it successfully made him appear behind Mi Luo. The shadow sword in his hand stabbed out again, accurately piercing the wound. Immediately after, he followed up with the same shadow, sword overlay, and heavily slashed again. This time, the sword that had already cut open more than half of the wound was fatal to Star Master Luo. The shadow sword that had been overlaid 3 times hit twice in a row, and there were also 2 general attacks in between. All of this was done in the instant that Gunan attacked. 4 strikes in an instant. The poor Star Master Luo didn't even see his opponent. Half of his shoulder was cut off by the last strike, and his heart, which Gunan had been aiming at the whole time, was cut off and blood spurted out. After all, he was only a level 2 hero, which was equivalent to someone who had just entered the transcendent level. He wasn't in good condition either, so how could he withstand an attack like Gunan's? The old Star Master Luo struggled for a while, and finally couldn't hold himself up any longer. He fell from midair. At the same time that he died, the blood curtain in the sky flashed, and a white light shone from the sky, piercing through the blood and shooting into Gunan's body. Gunan clearly saw that his hero coins had increased by another 500. One head was worth 500 coins, which was as good as a last hit. Brother! On the side, Lord of Sky covering Star only had time to cry out in shock. His figure flew towards Gunan, but the latter used another flash strike and appeared behind the girl. No return. Shadow Sword overlay and 4 consecutive flash strikes had drained most of Gunan's shadow power, so he had to stop and rest. When he looked over again, Star Master of Sky was gritting his teeth, but he didn't lose his cool and had no intention of coming up to die. He even backed off and landed. After all, he was a Star Master. He would be caught off guard by Gunan's scheme, but he wouldn't act impulsively. He would only die once, and it wasn't like he couldn't be resurrected. Also, Star Master Sky was smart enough to choose to land. What a pity. Gunan couldn't help but shake his head. These Star Masters might not be familiar with the rules of the game, but they still had a good grasp of the situation. If he hadn't fallen, it wouldn't have taken long for you to kill him too, right? Girl No Return said. She was absolutely right. If Gunan could use Shadow Sword Overlay to kill Star Master Luo, his brother naturally couldn't escape. It was just that the enemy was prepared and needed more time. As long as Gunan recovered, it wouldn't be difficult for him to kill the enemy. But now that the enemy had chosen to land among the soldiers, the situation was different. Chapter 221. The World of Heroes was more like a holographic game from Gunan's previous life. It was completely different from a competitive game with a keyboard and mouse. One of the big differences was that under normal circumstances, it was difficult for the soldiers to hit them. After all, the heroes were extraordinaires and had the ability to fly in the air. How could the soldiers on the ground hit them? Even long-range shooters would have their power reduced if they shot upwards. Normally, the heroes wouldn't cross the line easily. This meant that if they crossed the line too much, it would be easy for the enemy to circle around and force them to land. If they only crossed the line a little, it wouldn't actually affect them. Even if they attracted the hatred of the small soldiers, as long as they weren't entangled by the enemy, they had nothing to fear. That was why when Gunan controlled the line of soldiers under the tower, they could be so arrogant that the enemy couldn't land the last hit. They had their backs against the city wall. Even if they crossed the line, the second me couldn't surround them. It was because of this setting that when the Lord of Sky chose to land among the soldiers, he was protected by the line of soldiers. If Gunan tried to kill him now, the soldiers of the Black Camp wouldn't be polite. But if he did that, he wouldn't be able to land the last hit at all. Gunan said with a smile. At first, the heroes all chose to float in the air. Of course, it wasn't just to look cool. The vision in the air made it easier to observe the whole situation and see where to land the last hit. Once they were on the ground, they could only see their surroundings. The number of last hits they could land was very low. What do we do next? Do we still push the line? Young girl No Returned seemed to have become a curious baby. She asked Gunan every step. She had gradually gotten used to Gunan's words, and the questions were very insightful. The Lord of Sky hid among the soldiers to protect himself, and also to slow down the pace of pushing the line. If he attacked the soldiers unscrupulously, He might be ambushed by the enemy. Push the line, Gunan said without hesitation. The purpose of controlling the line was to delay the enemy's last hit or even kill the enemy. Now that the tactical goal had been achieved, what was the need to continue? While saying this, Gunan handed something to no return. It was a basket full of long swords. These swords were all weapons used by mortals, and they were made of inferior quality. Nogue even felt like he could break them with a casual snap. This is what you found in the camp? Yes. After getting an affirmative answer, young girl No Return looked at Gunan with a strange gaze. She waited until Gunan reached the line of soldiers before throwing her sword down. Under Gunan's monstrous strength and gravity, the sword, which was not sharp, actually pierced through an enemy's body. There seemed to be a moment of silence on the battlefield. The weapons falling from the sky made many people subconsciously raise their heads. When they saw Gunan's figure and recognized which side he belonged to, the white camp burst into cheers. On the other hand, the black camp's morale plummeted again after Milo's death. The difference between the world of heroes and a pure competitive game was reflected in every detail. Morale was also a very important factor. Previously, when the white camp was easily pushed out of the line, morale was also a factor. Isn't there transcendent suppression? Young girl No Return had already come to Gunan's side. She also tried to throw her sword down, and the result was the same. Transcendent suppression is suppressing our transcendent power. Gunan aimed at another enemy and casually stabbed him to death. And it was the sword that killed them, not us. Young girl No Return was startled. After thinking for a long time, she seemed to be right. Why didn't you use it before? It was the sword that killed them, and the money didn't belong to me. Baijan said. Shadow Song and Purple Lightning were still suppressing the enemy's line of soldiers, and they almost couldn't raise their heads. The city wall was being worn down bit by bit. It was not their first time entering the world of heroes. They might not have a deep understanding of the line control technique, but they could understand the basic principles. At this moment, their line of soldiers stopped in front of the enemy's city wall to ensure that the enemy would not dare to go out, and they could easily finish them off. At the same time, because of the advantage of the line of soldiers, they could organize an attack on the city wall every 2 waves of soldiers, causing great pressure on the black camp. This was the tactical intention that the 2-star masters, Mi Luo and Mi Tian, hoped to achieve. However, it was completely destroyed by Gunan's counterattack. Just as Shadow Song and Purple Lightning continued to attack, a white light suddenly flashed on the other side of the blood-red sky and landed on the white camp. Both veterans, Shadow Song and Purple Lightning, were stunned. They looked at each other in surprise and could not help but look in that direction. Of course, they understood that this was a sign that the enemy heroes had been killed. Those two were clearly veterans. How could they have died by their hands? The petite Shadow Song said as she flung her cloak. She didn't even bother to push the thread. Purple Lightning's face showed some helplessness. He also put away his sword and said, "The origin of Buddha is still clear. If there's someone who could do this, I'm afraid it's only that little guy." These two people who had lived for tens of thousands of years were not wrong to call Gunan that. The two of them were silent for a while. They did not know how Gunan had done it, so they became more and more curious about this mysterious guy. What does that person mean by asking him to protect me? Shadow Song casually stabbed his scimitar into his own body. The scimitar, Shadow Song, sank into Shadow Song's abdomen, but it did not cause any wound. Instead, it was like a drop of water falling into the sea, directly melting in. Purple Lightning just shook his head gently. She has been in charge of the star boundary for several eras and rarely interfered in the affairs of the inner world. This time, she made an exception. Although Purple Lightning was just calmly narrating, Shadow Song had been with him for many years and had long understood what he was talking about. There aren't many things that person would care about. There seemed to be a faint bloody light flashing in Shadow Song's eyes. That Gunan, he recognized me. This face. Black Warpath. Gunan and the young girl No Return gave up on the economy of finishing off the enemy and used the dart method to push the line. The speed at which they cleared the line immediately increased by more than 1 level. Only someone like Gunan, who had finished off the Mark soldiers, would dare to sacrifice their economy like this. Otherwise, pushing the line like this would not be worth it. If Gunan and No Return had only lost some economy, the Star Lord of Heaven wanted to cry, but had no tears to shed. His older brother Milo had not been resurrected yet. He had originally hidden among the soldiers, thinking that he was temporarily safe, at least until the next wave of soldiers arrived. Who knew that these two fellows would actually find mortal weapons? When the soldiers of the Black Camp all fell, the Star Lord of Covering Heaven was also in a state of no way out. He could only watch as Gunan and the young girl, No Return, rushed towards him at the same time. Gunan even said something. Chapter 222. After successfully collecting the head of Star Lord of Sky, Gunan's hero coins had exceeded 1,000. Of course, young Lady No Return did not compete with him for the kill. She could not possibly win against him. Although the experience was not enough for him to reach level 3, Gunan could purchase skill points to learn Body of the Evil God. In a hero's world, the skill level could not exceed the level of the hero. If Gunan had enough skill points, he could upgrade all 3 of his skills to level 2. Should we clear the second wave of troops before the other 2 arrive? Young Lady No Return asked after seeing Star Lord of Sky's death. Gunan looked at her. He knew that a Star Lord like her had top-notch comprehension and learning abilities. She had only watched him deal with the troops a few times, but her understanding of the troops was already comparable to that of an average player. Under normal circumstances, taking advantage of the time when the enemy heroes were reviving to push the troops forward was indeed the best choice. However, this was clearly not the case. With 3 skills, Gunan had the ability to fight against 2 enemies at once. I will go to the back. Station the troops near the city wall. Gunan instructed young Lady No Return. Station the troops. This was a new concept. Young Lady No Return was startled. How do I do it? Do you remember how I control the troops? Yang Guang was very excited. The second wave of white camp soldiers that he belonged to had been winning ever since they came to the front line, especially after Star Lord of Sky's death. As expected of a hero, after witnessing Gunan's heroic deeds, Yang Guang's impression of him had changed greatly. Bullying his own sister had suddenly turned into a hero who did not care about trifles. He was even glad that he did not question the other party. Quan, you are right. Yang Guang stood in the formation and killed another enemy soldier. He said to his brother Yang Quan, no matter what, he is still a hero. Yang Quan smiled bitterly. He understood what his brother meant, but it would be ridiculous to say that he had expected this. Moreover, compared to his brother, Yang Quan had read more books and had a better understanding of heroes. In the past, the deeds of the legendary heroes were not like this one. While the two were talking, a sharp whistle suddenly came from behind them. The 2 brothers turned around in shock. That sharp whistle came from the commander's camp, and the meaning of this whistle could not be clearer. Enemy attack. To be able to launch a sneak attack on the commander's camp. Could it be that the enemy had a 3rd hero? Yang Guang and Yang Quan wanted to rush back immediately, but in the military camp, they could not move freely without orders. They could only wait anxiously. Fortunately, they didn't have to wait too long. The messenger soon arrived. Passed the military order. Everyone, the orderly's tone, which was supposed to be rhythmic, was filled with helplessness. Return to the camp. On the other side of the black battle path, the second wave of troops had already set off a long time ago. However, the resurrected Mi Luo Star Lord was in no hurry to move. He had entered the world of heroes several times. Although he was not like Young Girl No Home and had a good teacher like Gunan to learn from, he was not an idiot. The other party had used 2 skills to kill him instantly. After killing him and his younger brother, he could obtain another 1,000 hero coins. In other words, the other party already had 3 skills. Thinking of this, Mi Luo Star Lord felt a headache. In order not to continue sending the other party's head, Mi Luo Star Lord wisely did not advance immediately. Instead, he chose to wait for his younger brother. Mi Luo Star Lord died almost at the same time as him, so the time of his resurrection was naturally close. Soon, the 2 of them set off from the camp and began to head for the frontline city wall. Brother, that person probably has 3 skills. Should we wait at the city wall? The young-looking Luo, Star-Lord, was not young at all when it came to handling matters. Instead, he was very cautious. Luo Star-Lord nodded. If the other party presses below our city wall, we'll follow them and wait for the third wave of soldiers. Be careful. Luo Star-Lord roared, but he could not move in time. He could only watch as Gunnan appeared instantly and slashed at his younger brother's back. Another 4 slashes in an instant. Moreover, it was 4 slashes with the power of the body of the evil god. The poor Luo Star-Lord was chosen by Gunnan to be the first target to be killed because he had a charging skill. His last thought was, "Why is he here?" Baijan said. No matter which battle path it was, the speed at which troops were dispatched was the same. Shadow Song and Luo had just used the second wave of soldiers to cause a lot of damage to the enemy city wall when 2 more white lights flashed across the blood-red sky. This time, 2 heroes had died one after the other. 2 more. This is really... Shadow Song's eyes seemed to be bloodshot. Even his pupils had turned blood-red, but he was so shocked by this scene that he turned around to look. Even before the third wave of soldiers had arrived, the other party had already died 4 times. At this rate, it was as if the other party was sending themselves to their deaths. The 2 of them, who clearly had the geographical advantage, were only suppressing the other party and trying to wear down the city wall. After all, they were both Star-Lords. Even if the other party was not familiar with the rules and did not cooperate much, they could still easily protect themselves. Looks like we can relax a little this time. Purple Lightning did not seem to care and was even happy to see it happen. Compared to Luo and Tion, this uncle and lowly duo clearly had a clear division of labor. Shadow Song was responsible for attacking the enemy heroes, while Purple Lightning put more energy into finishing off the enemy. Although he was not as good as Gunnan's invulnerability, he was still much better than Ermi. At this rate, he only needed 2 more waves of minions to get his first skill point. Just as the 2 of them were methodically finishing off the enemy and the third wave of soldiers arrived, a voice suddenly sounded in their ears. Clear the soldiers and prepare to cross the tower. Shadow Song and Purple Lightning looked down in astonishment. Even their movements paused for a moment as they found a familiar figure among the third wave of soldiers. Gunnan, why is he here? Shadow Song almost threw the scimitar in her hand. This scene was really beyond her expectations. Although the hero's era did not limit the number of people in each battle path, it was almost the default rule to have 2 people per path. The reason was very simple. 2 people were more than enough to defend against 3 people, and if they supported each other, they would be able to escape. It was too difficult for a single person to defend against a 2-person siege, and if they were not careful, they could be killed directly. So, as long as one had a little common sense, it was impossible to assign 3 people to a path. However, Shadow Song quickly reacted. This time, it was not just 3 people. The other side had already sent out 4 people. If this advantage was concentrated on 1 person. Chapter 223. On the White Path. The 2 heroes of Black Camp were 2 Star-Lords who did not know each other. Star-Lords did not team up to begin with, and the All-Heaven Star path was filled with solo players. However, they were helpless when they encountered Shadow Song and Purple Lightning, who had great teamwork. It was not the first time the 2 from Black Camp had entered the world of heroes, so they knew very well that teamwork between 2 heroes would have a huge impact on the battle. So from the beginning, the 2 of them had the mentality of not wanting to win, but to not make mistakes, and just stayed within their own city walls. This tactic seemed to be very effective. At least so far, the 2 of them could only attack the city walls and could not do anything to them. However, when the third wave of troops arrived, this stalemate was broken. The 2 heroes were clearly still suspended in midair, but suddenly, a fluctuation of law appeared among the soldiers on the ground. Extraordinary power! It's a hero! One of the Star-Lords was shocked, and just as he was about to warn his companion, he saw the one-eyed Star-Lord next to him looking behind him in horror. Before he could move, he felt a sudden pain on his back, and a terrifying force almost sent him flying. This was not the end. He did not even have time to turn around, and a few more attacks came. The The tearing pain made this Star-Lord both shocked and angry. He knew that he did not have much chance of survival, but he could not figure it out. How could such a powerful opponent appear? This was his own city wall. He was not wrong. Almost at the same time he was killed, a beam of light suddenly shot out from the city wall and hit the enemy behind him. For heroes of this era, the attack power of the city wall was still quite impressive. Even if Gu-Nen circled around and killed Mi Luo and Mi Tian and successfully activated Evil God Body by level 2, he still could not withstand the damage from the city wall. The beam of light directly penetrated his chest, and the high-energy heat left a scorched black mark on Gu-Nan's body. Even his tissues began to carbonize. However, he still had no intention of leaving, and his gaze shifted to the one-eyed Star-Lord next to him. The latter's mouth twitched slightly. He had no way out and could only raise his hand to attack. In the beginning, almost everyone would choose to use offensive skills in order to gain an advantage in the army, so this one-eyed Star-Lord could only try to replace Gu-Nan. Of course, that was impossible. Gu-Nan, who was using all his skills, was much more agile than him. Before his opponent's attack arrived, Gu-Nan had already flashed to his back and slashed repeatedly with his Sword of Shadow. But this time his Shadow sword overlay was on cooldown, so he had to endure another attack from the city wall. After taking 3 laser strikes in a row, Gu-Nan finally succeeded in killing the one-eyed Star-Lord, but he was already riddled with holes. I can't take it, and I can't dodge it. He's really a transcendent killer. Gu-Nan used up the last of his strength to escape with a flash strike. Most of the lasers on the city wall were composed of the power of laws, but they had the characteristic of breaking through laws. Most of the damage was directly inflicted on Gu-Nan. Fortunately, Gu-Nan had added 2 levels to his defensive skills. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to survive this attack. However, he earned another 1,000 hero coins and leveled up to level 3 due to the hero's EXP. This made Gu-Nan feel gratified. Another 2 streaks of white light streaked across the sky. Shadow Song and Purple Lightning looked at each other helplessly. They finally understood why the other side died so miserably. This Gu-Nan had clearly added 3 skills. He could kill the other side's hero single-handedly. During the entire tower crossing process, neither of them provided any help. At most, they helped push the line in, giving Gu-Nan a chance to approach the other side. In the words of the game, Gu-Nan, with 6 kills in his hands, was much more developed than the other side. In addition, he was an assassin-type skill set to begin with, which was why he was able to achieve such an incredible feat. But with your current injuries, I'm afraid it'll take a long time for you to recover, right? Shadow Song said as he looked at Gu-Nan, who had returned. Gu-Nan, who had continuously tanked the tower, seemed to be in quite a sorry state. The laser attacks on the wall had a scattering effect, so Gu-Nan's entire left arm was practically covered in small holes. Just this appearance alone was enough to drive someone with trypophobia crazy. Although there was Heroes Spring Water in Heroes World, it was only used to revive heroes. It didn't have any effect to speed up recovery. Yeah, it'll take at least a few days for me to recover, Gu-Nan agreed. The body of the evil god was very powerful, but without the triple recovery from Praise of Dawn, this kind of injury couldn't be healed quickly. Shadow Song secretly let out a sigh of relief. This Gu-Nan wasn't invincible after all. Then you. But before she could finish speaking, Gu-Nan's figure had already dashed out again, heading straight for the opposite wall, leaving behind these words. You guys continue pushing the tower. I'm going to send them off. When Gu-Nan resurrected from the spring and returned to the Black War path, the young girl No Return fully executed his orders and gathered all the remaining troops in front of the wall. Now, there were 4 white camp commanders standing beside No Return, which meant that there were already 4 waves of troops in front of the wall. Mi Luo and Mi Tian had returned to the front line and were looking at the white camp wall in confusion. They didn't know what method the other side was using to stop the soldiers in front of the wall, but this situation made them very uncomfortable. Their own soldiers kept entering the range of the wall, but they were killed by the enemy soldiers on the wall, while the enemy soldiers suffered very few casualties. Correspondingly, the 2 of them couldn't get any EXP or hero coins, so they could only watch as more and more troops gathered on the opposite side. They tried all kinds of methods, but they couldn't stop their own soldiers. Whether it was threats, promises, or reasoning, they couldn't stop these brainwashed fools. It wasn't until the fifth wave of troops that the two of them finally reacted. It was a commander. Two distinguished heroes. What are you trying to do? The Black Camp commander, who was finally detained, glared at me Luo and me Tion. The old and young brothers looked at each other, thinking that if they knew what the other side wanted to do, they wouldn't be standing here. But in any case, they couldn't just sit back and watch their own soldiers die. At that moment, a shadow appeared on the opposite wall, and the obvious fluctuations of principle shocked the two of them at the same time. They knew very well that it was that guy who had returned. You've worked hard. Gunan looked down with satisfaction at the 4 waves of troops that had been gathered. Why did you take so long to come back this time? The young girl no return was a little surprised. She'd seen the white light in the sky a long time ago. Gunan didn't say that he had returned to the city for free and had wasted some time. Instead, just saying, let them go. This time we'll go straight to the high ground. How? Chapter 2:24. Near the white camp wall, the two armies that were originally confronting each other quietened down at the same time. Commander, the commander of the white camp. For the soldiers of the black camp, this was their goal. This was military merit. This was glory. At this moment, whether it was their own commander or the enemy below the wall, they couldn't resist their desire for military merit. As long as one person took the lead, the rest of the soldiers would pounce on him like wolves. Needless to say, the white camp would be forced to stay near the city walls because 4 of their commanders had been detained. Kill. Save the commander. Charge with me. Battle cries rang out from both sides at the same time. The soldiers from both sides didn't stop and clashed head-on. Thus, the advantage of the white camp's 4 waves of soldiers was quickly revealed. Due to the lack of effective command, the black camp's formation was quickly infiltrated. Almost every soldier of the black camp was facing a situation of 1 against 2, or even 1 against 3. Brother, let's retreat quickly. Star-Lord Tion immediately knew that the situation was bad and said hurriedly. The other side suddenly threw out the commanders and caused a decisive battle. How could the two of them not understand the intention of the other side when they thought about the shadow that was suspected to be Gunan? This was a guy with 4 heads in his hands. No one could resist him at this stage. They still didn't know that Gunan had just taken the time to gank and took 2 more heads on the white battle path. Otherwise, he would have run even faster. Star-Lord Luo's expression didn't look good either. He retreated with his brother without saying a word, but he didn't think it was a good idea. After all, once they moved against the line of soldiers, it was equivalent to exposing themselves. But for some reason, Gunan didn't appear even after they retreated to the bottom of the black camp wall. Finally, the two of them felt relieved. Gunan, who had already taken 6 heads, was indeed not in a hurry to kill them. Or rather, he had more important things to do. Do you see that soldier? He had a clear mark before he died. Killing him is worth 30 hero coins. You didn't see that clearly? Are you blind? Student No Return's face darkened. Under Gunan's guidance, she quickly learned how to deal the finishing blow. In fact, she was already a fast learner, but Gunan's requirements were indeed a little too high. However, it wouldn't do if it wasn't high, because Gunan's goal was for her to obtain the 2nd skill point in this wave of minions. As a professional player, Gunan knew very well that in order to win, he had to give up a portion of his income when his development had already exploded. Moreover, he wouldn't suffer a loss if he gave the money to young girl No Return, because her defensive skill was a godly tower crossing skill. Buddha's Heart Protection blocks the next incoming damage and reduces subsequent damage by 50%. This skill cannot be used on the same target within a short period of time. Active defensive skills weren't common, but they were undoubtedly powerful. Under Gunan's hands-on guidance, young girl No Return finally managed to recruit enough soldiers to barely gather 1,000 hero coins. Gunan could not help but secretly wipe the cold sweat off his forehead. Unfortunately, there was no such thing as an assist in the world of heroes. Otherwise, he wouldn't have to work so hard. While guiding young girl No Return, Gunan did not forget to seize the time to to push the lines and try to protect his own 4 waves of minions. Whether or not they could destroy the opposite wall would depend on them. Under the Black Camp's wall, Luo and Tion looked ahead with solemn expressions as a large wave of White Camp soldiers rushed over. The last wave of minions for today hasn't arrived yet. It seems that we can only try our best to defend. Luo rubbed the wrinkles on his face and said solemnly. Luo Star-Lord snorted coldly. That guy is indeed very powerful, but his mistake is that he shouldn't have exposed the method of accumulating soldiers. To think that this method could be used to accumulate soldiers. When the 2 Star-Lords first discovered this, their shock was indescribable. This was simply subverting the rules of the entire world of heroes. Once this method was learned by more people, in the future battles of the world of heroes, everyone would gather a large wave of soldiers and then fight to the death. Even now it was the same. Luo, Star-Lord sneered. As long as we can survive today, we will gather 6 waves of minions tomorrow and move out together. He's just asking for trouble. Once everyone gathered 6 waves of minions, it would obviously be more difficult for the other party to display their overly strong individual strength, and they would also have time to develop. When everyone had 3 skills, the other party would not be able to be so arrogant. The 2 Star-Lords' calculations were very accurate, but just as the White Camp soldiers were about to reach the city wall, a panting voice sounded. Be careful. The 2 turned their heads and saw their companion, the one-eyed Star-Lord, who was supposed to be on the white battle path, rushing over. One-eyed Star-Lord, who did not have any teleportation skills, had to rely on his own 2 legs to run over, and even flying was too slow. The one with the sword on the opposite side can kill people on the city wall. One-eyed Star-Lord saw the soldiers on the opposite side and shouted without even bothering to greet them. As for the specific words of One-eyed Star-Lord, Ermi could no longer hear them clearly. This was because at the same time when the voice was heard, the horrifying fluctuation of the rule had already appeared behind them, and the words that floated over from afar could only be heard clearly on the city wall. The pitch-black shadow sword fell, and this time, Gunan did not need to use the operation of resetting his basic attack, and directly using 2 skills was enough to kill one person. Seeing that the figure appeared again and instantly killed the hero on his side in front of him, One-eyed Star-Lord almost wanted to beat his chest and stamp his feet. Just a little bit more time. If only he had arrived earlier. I'll fight you to the death. This roar came from Luo Star-Lord. This time, it was his turn to watch his brother get instantly killed, and the annoyance of being crushed by others finally surged in his heart. However, in this world, a small explosion of the universe was never enough to solve the problem. The economic gap was too big, and even if Gu Nan and his opponent were from different places, he could not think of a good solution, let alone these Star-Lords who were not familiar with the game. In just a moment, the shadow sword suddenly fell, and Luo Star-Lord followed in his brother's footsteps, contributing a head to Gu Nan, another 2 heads, and another 1,000 hero coins. As of now, Gu Nan already had 8 heads in his hands, and according to the calculation in the game, he was now in the state of super god. Of course, there would not be such a boring thing in the hero world, and the Star-Lords would not care about such glory, they only cared about victory. After beheading Luo Star-Lord with 1 sword, Gu Nan suffered another 3 laser attacks. Even with the Buddha's heart protection surrounding his body, which blocked most of the damage, the price of crossing the tower at this time was still too high, and Gu Nan was like an arrow at the end of its flight. Chapter 225. Under Black Camp's wall, Gu Nan had already used Flash Strike to return a girl no-return side. He looked at the opposite wall and sighed. There's a problem. There's a 3rd person. Gu Nan was talking about the one-eyed Star-Lord. After another wave of solo tower hopping, he was once again left with a serious injury and could no longer attack that person. Moreover, Buddha's heart protection had a cooldown and could not be used on him for a period of time. It's someone from the combat path? No Return quickly reacted and raised her eyebrows. Gu Nan nodded and did not speak. These Star-Lords were indeed not simple characters. Even if they were temporarily suppressed by his experience, their understanding of the situation would not fall. After the one-eyed Star-Lord was defeated by him, he quickly thought that the same thing would happen here, so he hurried over. However, he was a step too late. Even so, he still brought a lot of trouble to Gunnan, because in the upcoming siege, there was no hero to help defend the city. The difference was simply unreasonable. "I'll take the attack from the wall and kill him," No Return said without hesitation. She also understood the logic, so even if she had to sacrifice her life, she had to kill the opponent's hero. As long as that person died, there was hope for the city to be breached. However, Gunnan shook his head lightly. "He knows we can cross the tower. Why would he still stay on the wall?" No Return was startled. When she turned her head to look, the one-eyed Star-Lord was indeed gone. She frowned and looked down. The two sides had already started fighting. It seemed like the opponent was hiding in the soldiers. Even without the line of soldiers, there were still a small number of soldiers stationed inside the wall. This was also the last defense force. If there was no enemy hero, Gunnan and No Return could quickly clear these soldiers and participate in the siege. "We'll press in front of the line of soldiers. If he dares to show himself, you use your skill to steal the aggro. I'll kill him." Gunnan said to No Return, "If he doesn't come out, we'll clear the line." Without the last line of soldiers, the one-eyed Star-Lord would have no place to hide. So, the two of them went to the front of the line of soldiers, attacking the enemy soldiers while also paying attention to the enemy's movements. However, this time, the two of them were out in the open. From time to time, there would be law fluctuations coming from the front lines. By the time the two of them wanted to search, the enemy had already disappeared. What was he doing? The young girl, No Return, frowned. She couldn't understand why the other party would pop up from time to time, but didn't do anything substantial. Could it be that it interfered with their clearing efficiency? "It's a last hit," Gunnan said with a sullen face. Even in such a chaotic situation, he still discovered the true purpose of the one-eyed Star-Lord. He should have quite a few last hits over there. Gunnan looked at the law fluctuations that appeared once again and said, "He wants to wait until he gets his second skill. That way, even if he attacks us head-on, it's not impossible." Gunnan was very clear that the reason he could suppress these Star-Lords was because they had no skills, or rather, only learned one offensive skill. Once the opponent's skills became more plentiful, Gunnan would no longer be able to achieve such an instant kill. Within the city walls, if he couldn't achieve an instant kill, it would mean that he couldn't do anything to the opponent. The young girl, No Return, frowned. She realized that the opponent's choice was very crafty. It was right on their weak points. If they allowed the opponent to pass through this wave of troops, then their advantage would not be that great. She pondered for a moment before saying, "I'll go and lure." "No need," Gunnan interrupted her. "If this person wants to compete with me in last hits, then let's compete." Yang Guang was already standing under the black camp city wall. He raised a spear in his hand and shouted excitedly. He had been learning martial arts since young. His martial arts skills were well known in the village. It was just that he didn't have the chance to step onto a bigger stage. Now, he finally had the chance. "Kill. Follow me and kill." Yang Guang pointed the spear in his hand. Instantly, a few soldiers charged forward with him. Naturally, this included his younger brother, Yang Quan. The world of heroes' battle formation was rarely controlled as a whole. When it came to battles, most of them would fight in small teams. Due to Yang Guang's previous outstanding performance, he had been appointed as a team leader on the way here. He had 6 soldiers under his command. "Guang, retreat for a moment." Yang Quan's voice could be heard from behind. Even though Yang Guang was the team leader, he did not doubt his younger brother's judgment. He retreated without hesitation and even called for his comrades to follow him. Indeed, not long after they retreated, the enemy's formation suddenly shrunk. The enemies in front of them suddenly became denser. If they didn't retreat in advance, they would have been surrounded. "Ah, Guang, you're really something." One of his comrades patted Yang Quan's shoulder and praised him with a smile. Yang Quan's fair face revealed a peaceful smile, but he didn't say a word. Unlike his brother, Yang Guang, Yang Quan's martial arts skills weren't that outstanding. However, he was well-versed in military books since young. He was very familiar with the changes in the battle formation and the situation. He was the best candidate to be the commander. Just as he was about to arrange for his men to reinforce the formation, he heard a groan coming from the front. Aguang! Yang Quan looked up and his eyes widened. It was a stray arrow that came from nowhere. It landed on Yang Guang's abdomen and entered his body. The rest of the team panicked. They quickly pulled Yang Guang back and protected him in the middle. Guang, are you all right, Aguang? Yang Quan shook Yang Guang's body, trying to wake him up. If he were to faint at this moment, it would be the end of him. Yang Guang covered his wound with one hand and vomited blood. Even his eyes looked like they were about to lose focus. Yang Quan was about to go crazy. He forcefully took off his battle robe and tried to stop his brother's bleeding. However, it was useless. Vaguely, he saw an inexplicable light rising above his brother. This is... Yang Quan looked up in shock. He had never seen such a thing before. At this moment, an inexplicable wave appeared beside the two of them. A one-eyed man appeared. He was the one-eyed Star Master of the Black Camp. Another one. The one-eyed Star Master chuckled. His eyes were filled with gratification. Of course, he had also noticed the world mark. He was obviously satisfied with the 30 hero coins that he had earned. Yang Quan did not recognize the other party. However, the strange wave made him realize the other party's identity immediately. Hero. It was the enemy's hero. His severely injured brother was still in his arms, and the enemy was right in front of him. Such a hopeless situation made Yang Quan fall into deep despair. At this moment, Yang Quan hoped that the hero would appear in time to save them. However, his rationality told him that in such a chaotic battle, even His Excellency the hero would be helpless. Would there be a miracle? Yang Quan could not help but look up. He saw Gunan's figure still hanging high in the sky. However, he seemed to have noticed the situation here. He waved his hand and shot a ray of black light towards Yang Quan. Yang Quan's heart was suddenly filled with hope. Even if he could only block the opponent for a while, the hero would have the chance to rush over. The one-eyed Star Master sneered in his heart. As a Star Master, he knew better than Yang Quan that the opponent was simply using the passive principle. It would not affect him at all, even if it was used on an ordinary soldier. Chapter 226. The battlefield below the city wall seemed to have fallen into silence for a moment, and this stagnant situation gradually disappeared as Yang Guang's head fell to the ground. The frozen scene was unfrozen once again. In the chaotic battlefield, this seemed to be just a small interlude. Only the few people involved realized what it meant. One-eyed Star-Lord was almost dumbfounded. He had never thought that a hero would actually attack his own soldiers just to hinder the other party's finishing blow. In reality, these Star-Lords had never paid enough attention to the last hit. This could also be seen from the actions of Mi Luo and Mi Tian. Obviously, it would not be too bad if they wanted to finish off the enemy, but they chose to focus on killing. After all, in a real war, there was no such thing as killing the enemy's soldiers first and leaving the main general alone. However, One-Eyed Star-Lord was a Star-Lord after all. After being stunned for a moment, he quickly reacted and his figure quickly disappeared. In any case, the other party had already brought him enough surprises. One more wouldn't make a difference. Besides, if he didn't leave now, he might end up like Yang Guang. If One-Eyed Star-Lord was only surprised that there was such a thing, then Yang Quan's worldview was about to collapse. He was a more rational person than his brother, Yang Guang, so he had a higher tolerance for some of the outrageous actions of Sir Hero. However, what he could not tolerate did not include attacking his own soldiers, especially when the target was his brother. Anger suddenly broke through Yang Quan's mind. He felt as if something had broken. Something was clearly wrong in the past, but he did not know why he had ignored it. Now it all came to his mind. Hoarding soldiers and attacking together would be more effective. Why didn't he think of such a simple principle? Even he was familiar with military books. There were so many commanders and generals in the camp. Why did they have to send out a small number of soldiers every time? Why did the white camp and the black camp have to fight each other for no reason? Why couldn't they just sit down and talk? No one could answer Yang Quan's questions. These were all unimaginable things, but they seemed to have been ignored by everyone. Yang Quan was on the blood-splattered battlefield, but his heart was cold. He raised his head and looked into the distance. In the blood-red sky, as usual, it was as if there was an invisible hand controlling everything. No matter what Yang Quan thought, it was normal for Gu Nan to counterattack. He didn't mind using this method to suppress One-Eyed Star-Lord's follow-up attack. As long as the One-Eyed Star-Lord didn't have enough sabers before the city guards were cleared out, he wouldn't dare to appear in front of them. Then, the siege wouldn't be affected. Boom! Gu Nan slashed another shadow sword at the city wall. Even with the transcendent suppression, the obvious tremors showed the damage the city wall had suffered. The large amount of hero and soldier EXP allowed Gu Nan to reach level 4, which was equivalent to the Downlord realm in the outside world. If he could reach the 5th level, he would be able to break the world again. At the same time, he would be able to get the big move, Justice Judgment. His fighting power would have a qualitative change. However, the amount of experience required for this level was more than the previous 4 levels combined. For the time being, there was no chance. One-Eyed Star-Lord was still hiding among the city guards. Ever since Gu Nan made his move, he couldn't get a good follow-up attack. He was perfectly suppressed by Gu Nan's counterattack. The number of white camp soldiers that died in Gu Nan's hands was more than 10, and One-Eyed Star-Lord's space of activity was further reduced. Until the last soldier fell, One-Eyed Star-Lord had nowhere to hide. He had no choice but to retreat to the back of the city wall. The city wall might not be able to hold, but he wasn't stupid enough to die with it. On the white battle path, Shadow Song and Purple Lightning fought for a while. They retreated to the back and waited for the last wave of soldiers to arrive. They were already familiar with this. In the past, when they entered the hero era, it was a similar situation. However, in the blood-red sky, a white firework suddenly exploded. It was beautiful and eye-catching. Shadow Song and Purple Lightning looked over there in shock. The white firework meant that the Black Camp city wall was destroyed. However, the city wall here was still intact. There was only one possibility. He took down the city wall in just one day. Shadow Song couldn't hide the surprise in his eyes. This was completely illogical. If it was Gu Nan who killed the enemy heroes, it was possible that he was too strong. But how did he break through the city wall? At this stage, no matter how powerful a hero was, he couldn't withstand more than a few laser attacks from the city wall, unless a large number of soldiers arrived at the city wall at the same time. Purple Lightning's face was also filled with doubt. However, his judgment was quite close to the truth. Shadow Song was silent for a while. Then, she said in a low voice, "We need to work hard too. There's only one person on the other side." With the tacit understanding between the two of them, Purple Lightning naturally understood what she was talking about. On the black battle path, after Gu Nan broke through the city wall, there were still many white camp soldiers left. They continued to advance toward the Black Camp's headquarters. At this moment, 2 rays of light flashed in the sky at almost the same time, one white and one black. Gu Nan looked up and couldn't help but smile. This was the sacrifice of one person on the other side, forcefully swapping out the enemy hero. One-Eyed Star Master came here to report, so there was only one person left to defend. Once he was swapped out, the city wall would be in trouble again. The terrain of the world of heroes wasn't complicated. After the city wall was pushed down, the Black Camp's main gate was basically open, waiting for Gu Nan and the others to visit. Only about a wave of white camp soldiers were left. The camp gate, which was far inferior to the city wall, couldn't stop them at all. Countless Black Camp citizens fled in all directions. It felt as if the devil had entered the village. However, the white camp soldiers were clearly disciplined. Even in the face of the Black Camp, which had a feud with them, they didn't have any intention of wantonly killing. Instead, they headed straight for the barracks. Soldiers kept pouring out of the Black Camp. They were the garrison of the Black Camp's headquarters. Young girl No Return was about to go over to help, but was pulled back by Gu Nan. "There are too few soldiers. We can't kill them all at once. We'll go and cause trouble." "How?" "Murder and arson," Gu Nan said coldly. "These soldiers saw their loved ones killed and their homes burned. How can they stay calm? We'll wait for them to scatter into the barracks. They'll be exhausted from running for their lives. Only when there's no military formation left can we make our move." Young girl No Return nodded. Makes sense. Despicable and shameless. Another voice came from behind them. It was a young man who had heard Gunan's words and was staring at him angrily. It was Yang Quan. At this moment, Yang Quan's hair was disheveled and his eyes were bloodshot. He felt as if his whole body was about to fall apart. There seemed to be something in his heart that was about to burst out. Chapter 227. Wulin Chinese Network, the latest chapter of crossing the heavens and becoming an evil god. Interesting. Gunan gave such an evaluation. A person dissipating and a law at that. What did this mean? Either this person had completely become a law, and his life essence had entered a whole new level, or he was originally made of laws and was about to disintegrate. Ever since entering the hero's world, Gunan, who seemed to know everything, was finally attracted. This made Girl No Return feel more at ease. The heavenly star path, or the inner world, is like this. No Return said, everything here is made of laws, so it can be infinitely reset, always corresponding to the real plane of the surface world. Gunan nodded lightly, thought for a moment, and said, there are some planes of the surface world that can automatically reset. Are they also related to the inner world? Yes. No Return seemed to have a rare opportunity to be a teacher. At the junction of the surface world and the inner world, there will be some small planes with chaotic laws, causing the outside and the inside to be reversed. Back when Gunan first entered the astral world and was taken to the Tower of Light, he had seen a plane that could be reset. At that time, the people in the Tower of Light had their own understanding, of course, completely different from what Girl No Return said. Considering the level of both sides, Gunan was naturally more willing to believe No Return. Insignificant people looking at the world was like a blind man touching an elephant. They could only see a small part of the essence. The rest depended on guessing. The two talked like there was no one else around, and did not seem to avoid Yang Quan at all. But the information revealed in their conversation gave Yang Quan a splitting headache. He seemed to understand something, but also like he did not understand anything. The fragmented information circled his mind bit by bit, as if something was about to come out, but was suppressed by an invisible force. Fortunately, Yang Quan did not need to worry about it very soon. Gunan had already pierced his chest, and then threw him into the residential area of the Black Camp. An unstable body of laws like him was the most suitable to be a human bomb. Sure enough, not long after, when the part of Yang Quan that was human completely disappeared, the power of laws in his body was no longer restrained and suddenly exploded. An energy storm that only extraordinaires could sense silently swept through the Black Camp. Once mortals came into contact with it, they would be eroded and shattered in the blink of an eye. Even the surrounding buildings would not be spared. You've helped us a lot, Gunan said with a smile. Originally, he wanted to stir up trouble himself. Now that he had done this, the effect was better than he had expected. Before young girl Wu Guwei could speak, the blood-colored sky suddenly darkened, and the scene in front of Gunan instantly disappeared. When he reappeared, Gunan was already in a pitch-black void. Around him were his three companions, Wu Guwei, Shadow Song, and Violet Lightning. Did those four guys on the other side quit? What a wise choice. When Shadow Song saw this scene, he immediately came back to his senses and laughed. The city wall was breached in a single day. There's not much hope left. The handsome uncle, Purple Bolt, shook his head helplessly. It's better to retreat earlier. That way, we can save some astral world essence. Hearing their conversation, Gunan and No Return understood, but Gunan understood even more. They were surrendering, or perhaps they had just resurrected and happened to see the energy storm erupt in the camp. Their morale was about to drop. Naturally, Gunan was happy to see this move that saved everyone trouble. Dungeon main storyline quest completed. Main storyline evaluation. A. Sub-storyline development rate. B. Map exploration rate. B. Sin rating. B. General evaluation. B+. Accumulated points, 350. Accumulated sin rating, 50. Inside the Evil God's Temple, the long-awaited dungeon completion system notification finally appeared. However, the reward made Gunan frown. The reason he frowned was, Why was it so little? Ever since he had reached Tier 4, he had rarely encountered double-digit rewards. After all, the difficulty of a dungeon corresponded to the player's level. This didn't make sense. Originally, Gunan already had 1,350 sin rating. He had been hoping to break through the 1,500-point barrier this time. Then, with a few more points, he could activate the third law. He did not expect the world of heroes to be so stingy. Purple Lightning saw Gunan's expression and seemed to understand what he was thinking. He said, "In a playing group like the world of heroes, the origin elements that can be distributed are incomplete. The lower the rank, the more this is the case. To the Celestial Lords, the world origin was what they needed the most. The reason he came to the starry path of the inner world was to plunder the origin source and replenish the astral world he controlled. This time, young Lady No Return was clear. The playing group has thinned the origin, but they complement each other. The more they steal, the more complete the origin." Gunan didn't quite understand what she was saying, but the meaning was clear. This was a chain of multiple quests. The more they completed, the higher the reward. That's it for this time. Shadow Song, who only reached Violet's waist, concluded, "I'll need some time to adjust my ability to bring you to the inner world. I'll let you know next time." "When is the next time?" Gunan asked. "About 5 years from now." After saying this, she looked at Gunan with a "are you kidding me" expression and shrugged. For existences like us, that's already very fast. Uncle Purple Lightning also came up and patted Gunan on the shoulder. He smiled. "We're people who can coexist with the world. There's no need to worry about things like time." Young Lady No Return wasn't surprised at all. She and Gunan had previously argued about the concept of time. Gunan took a deep breath. Being able to go to the starry path of the heavens was Shadow Song's unique ability. If he couldn't force her, then he could only give up. However, he felt like he really needed to adjust his concept of time. In a game in his previous life, players couldn't spend hundreds of years doing certain things because they didn't have that kind of lifespan. But now he did. The current Gunan was still a player, but he was already one with an extremely long lifespan. Outside of the rules of the game that he was familiar with, he could search for and study some visible patterns that might also help him grow, such as the inner world. After returning to the astral world, the four were still on planet Jade Flower. Shadow Song and Violet Lightning had disappeared in the blink of an eye. The Shadow Song of the surface world was still a powerless little girl. She didn't dare to expose herself for too long. On the other hand, when young Lady No Return returned, she looked at Gunan and asked, "Are you interested in finding trouble with some people?" In the past, she probably wouldn't have cared about Gunan at all. But after this trip to the hero world, Gunan's existence seemed to have become an established fact. "Ooh," Gunan raised an eyebrow. "Shanghai Pavilion. If you wanted to read some light novels, go to Apex Novel Network." Chapter 228. Walin Chinese Network. Gunan knew about this a long time ago. Back in the day, Sky's secret path master set up No Return and forced her to reincarnate. That was how she got the opportunity to break the world. He thought after doing such a thing, hiding in Shanghai Pavilion would be safe. He did not expect to be chased by No Return to Shanghai Pavilion. In the end, he died. He originally thought that after doing such a thing that harmed others to benefit himself, hiding in the Starsea Pavilion would be foolproof. However, he didn't expect that he would be chased to the Starsea Pavilion by the young girl No Return. In the end, he still ended up dead. This was a big deal. Shanghai Pavilion lost a lot of face. After that, they started to monitor the entire astral world. Because of this, Shanghai Pavilion, which had been relaxed for a few hundred years, suddenly became tense. That was why they reacted so quickly when Gunan made a move. When young girl No Gue opened her mouth, a series of reasons flashed through Gunan's mind. It was like doing quests. It was best to know the background story of an NPC. Gunan always paid attention to that. "Have you gotten your revenge against Sky Secret?" Gunan asked after thinking. "Why are you still looking for trouble with Shanghai Pavilion? Do you have other ideas?" Gunan wondered what her goal was, but No Return just shook her head. She did not want to talk about it. "You just need to answer me. Are you interested in participating?" "Ha! No." Gunan coldly laughed and casually replied. He knew No Return thought he had a grudge against Shanghai Pavilion. Maybe they had the same goal. In reality, No Return was thinking too much. He had never heard of players looking for an NPC for revenge. That was because all players understood that if they kept playing, they would be stronger than everyone else. With that kind of confidence, even if they were easily killed by a boss, the players could go back and level up. They could buy equipment and come back to fight again. Killing monsters to level up was a matter of course. On the other hand, there was nothing to be angry about being attacked by monsters. If you had aggro, of course you would be attacked. In the face of Gu Nan's refusal, the young girl, No Return, seemed to be mentally prepared. A rare smile appeared on her face as she looked at Gu Nan without saying anything. There seemed to be some deep meaning in her gaze, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she quickly turned around and left, leaving Gu Nan unable to guess what it was. In the Star Realm, Gu Nan was still affected by Yu-Gi-Oh's curse. His recovery ability was suppressed, so it was not convenient for him to go to the Shanghai Pavilion to wreak havoc. Right now, there were only two things that Gu Nan needed to do. One was naturally to wait 5 years for Shadow Song to open the star path again and take him to the inner world. On the other hand, Gu Nan felt that it was indeed necessary for him to settle down and do some experiments and research. Immortal Demon World. In the blink of an eye, it had been more than a year since Gu Nan left the hero world and returned to the surface world. As for the 1 year in the astral realm, because time flowed 10 times faster in the immortal demon world, a full 12 years had passed. The various systems that Gu Nan had been implemented very well. The immortal demon world was getting closer and closer to the god kingdom that he had envisioned. The Shanghai Pavilion had inspected the world and ordered all the transcendents to register. When everyone thought that it was destined to fail, it was actually carried out. This time, the Shanghai Pavilion's determination seemed to be especially firm. Whether it was bribery, concealment, or manipulation, they were all suppressed with lightning speed. Suddenly, the 9 major star fields were dyed red. In a short period of more than a year, the Star Realm had completely become a licensed practice. Transcendents who could not produce their documents would be interrogated as unregistered residents. Even the world breakers that the Shanghai Pavilion had sent to the major star fields did not seem to have any intention of returning. Aside from the central star field, the Shanghai Pavilion had sent more than 2 world breakers to the other 8 star fields. Some star fields even had roaming movements to ensure that there were always people guarding. If the inspection farce had made people think that the Shanghai Pavilion was going crazy, then the series of actions that followed were enough to make people realize what was going on. Is there going to be a war? Gu Nan looked through the information from the Star Realm. He understood what the Shanghai Pavilion was doing and what it meant. Probably. Since my little brother is back, he will not stop. Shadow Song sat across from Gu Nan and sipped a cup of coffee. This place is getting harder and harder to find. She was now in the immortal demon world. It was not easy to get a cup of coffee. It was even harder to locate the coordinates of the immortal demon world. That means my efforts over the years have paid off, Gu Nan said with a smile. Ever since he came back, Gu Nan had been looking for a way to move the immortal demon world. He wanted to mess up the coordinates of the place. After all, this was where his god kingdom was. Gu Nan did not want too many people to visit the place before he reached level 5. It would be a mess. Over the years, Gu Nan spent most of his time in the immortal demon world. He did not even go to the Star Realm. Planet Xian Yellow was in the hands of Shanghai Pavilion, but he did not care. The immortal demon world and Lan Si were there. Gu Nan did not care much about them. After all, as long as he had enough time, he could completely rebuild White Mist Set. There was no need for him to keep the original people. The only people he still had contact with were Shadow Song, Young Lady No Return, and the others. Wu Gui didn't have much to say to him. On the other hand, Shadow Song often came to his side with the appearance of an ordinary little girl. Although her power had not recovered much, she could travel between planes. She was like a world breaker. It seemed like this was determined by the nature of life. What business do you have this time? Nothing. Shadow Song picked up a fruit and put it in her mouth. Purple lightning is out again. I am afraid I will be killed, so I came here to hide. Obviously, Shadow Song's main body wasn't normal either. Everything she ate, she swallowed it whole. She did not chew. Right, every time I come, I see you. Have you been staying here all the time? Haven't you ever gone out? Gunan nodded without hesitation. For a player like him, who was half a nerd, staying at home was normal. Shadow Song looked like she had discovered a new continent. She looked at him with surprise. You're in the world breaker phase, right? Do you not need to collect the world's origin to improve your rules? For normal world breakers, they had the same nature of life as the Star Master. The way to progress was to collect the world's origin. Of course, the Star Master stole the origin to build or improve their star realm. World breakers mainly observed. They did not put it into their bodies. Seeing Gu, Nan remained silent. Shadow Song looked even more shocked. That cannot be true. You have been able to break the world. Did no one teach you anything? Gu Nan was speechless. The people who taught me, aside from a few enemies, were all killed by me. If you wanted to read some light novels, go to the Apex Novel Network. Chapter 229. Wulin Chinese Network Shadow Song didn't stay for long before leaving the immortal demon world. Clearly, Violet Lightning didn't spend too much time on this. But before she left, she gave Gu Nan a set of coordinates. The largest neutral trading plane in the heavenly world, purple Civ Heaven. Gu Nan sat down with a mark on it, but he felt a little playful in his mind. This was the second time he heard the name Purple Civ Heaven. The first time was when Duanmu Een said that the injured purple will hid in Purple Civ Heaven. On the other hand, Shadow Song's unintentional words made Gu Nan feel enlightened. He felt that his path was getting narrower and narrower. Many times, he seemed to have lost his goal. Now, he relied on the heavenly star path to prolong his life, which was the source of sin points. In the past, he always felt that the problem was with the evil god's temple, and that it couldn't provide him with more help. But now that he thought about it carefully, it seemed that he had also made a mistake. The evil god's temple was just a dead object. It couldn't always guide Gu Nan forward. In fact, as Gu Nan's realm increased, it gradually reduced the source of sin points. In fact, it had a very obvious direction. All of this was to tell Gu Nan one thing. After reaching the 4th level, the source of the world was sin points and points. At this stage, Gu Nan's path of advancement seemed to be the same as this world's. In the end, he was pursuing the same thing. This point corresponded with Gu Nan's original judgment. The power system of the game was essentially the same as this world, so the resources needed by cultivators were naturally the same. Such a simple thing, and you've only discovered it now? Blind student, the flourishing point you've discovered is the ladder of human progress. Gu Nan spat out some unintelligible words, but his thoughts became clearer and clearer. These years of research had given him a new understanding of the nature of the world. The surface world was the real world. Heaven and realm only had different names, but in essence, they were planes with complete rules. As for the world-level planes, they all had various flaws. The inner world was the hub that controlled the planes. It contained the most fundamental laws of each major plane, and these laws constructed the corresponding planes. Looking back, he was summoned by the evil god's temple when he was at the 1st rank. After the 2nd rank, he had to rely on himself to reincarnate. At the 4th rank, he didn't even have the chance to reincarnate. Perhaps the real turning point was not coming to the outside world, but his own advancement. Gu Nan's consciousness once again arrived at the evil god's temple. This familiar temple was the same as before, but in Gu Nan's eyes, it was somewhat unfamiliar. This place shouldn't be called the Evil God Hall, but the Evil God Nurturing Center. The goal was to nurture a true evil god. Teacher, the first martial arts competition between the two alliances has come to an end. These are the rankings. Yin Xiaoxiao's voice brought Gu Nan back to reality. A list of names had been handed to him, but Gu Nan had no interest in reading it. His mind was still immersed in his thoughts, but the real feeling of the immortal demon world made his mouth slightly reveal a smile. As long as the rules of the game still applied there, that was enough. He spent a lot of effort to study this world, but he did not want to abandon the rules of the game. Only by understanding reality could he better understand the rules of the game. Then, with the rules he was familiar with, He could beat one enemy after another. Gunan lowered his head and looked at the list. He put aside. The God Kingdom was still in the foundational stage. There were too many things that were not perfect yet. His goal was not to find a champion. It was, like I said before, the warriors with good rankings will be given a certain number of spouses based on their gender. That will allow their blood and genes to be passed on. Yin Xiaoxiao nodded without any expression. She had gotten used to Gunan's attitude. Selecting the most outstanding individuals in a group and then finding a way to breed them was a true pig-rearing method. Gunan thought about the coordinates and said, I will be going out soon. Is there anything else? Nothing much. By the way, Lan Si is in seclusion to break the world, Yin Xiaoxiao said after a moment of thought. Gunan nodded and did not say anything. Lan Si leveling up was a good thing, and it was something he expected. Her talent was not bad. In the past, her personality had held her back. With the help of a god's personality, it was normal for her to have a breakthrough after spending 10 years in the fairy demon world. On the other side of the endless space, a white-clothed, black-haired shadow slowly appeared. He entered a weird world. There was no space there, and there was no concept of a planet. The whole plane was one. The ground seemed to have a border. This was Purple Civ Sky, a famous neutral plane. Welcome to Purple Civ Sky, Mr. Gunan had just arrived when someone came to greet him. It was a woman wearing a white dress. She looked very polite. Gunan had torn space to come here. He did not ride a starship. That was enough to prove his identity. He was a world breaker. Even in a super big plane like Purple Civ Sky, world breakers were not cabbages that could be found on the side of the road. They were the reserve of Star-Lord. Normal people had to look up to them. The woman stood in front of Gunan. She lowered her head. She was very excited. Many world breakers came to Purple Civ Sky, but Purple Civ Sky was very big. Not many of them would be able to meet her. The woman did not dare do anything bad to a world breaker. She was a guide who wandered the plane's border. She relied on being a guide for the big shots to make a living. If he was able to make friends with a break world elite, there would be a lot of benefits. If there was hope, she did not mind giving up her body in exchange for resources for practice. In a neutral plane like Purple Civ Sky, the strong ate the weak. The law of the jungle was very clear. Mister, do you need? There is no need. A voice sounded behind Gunan. It interrupted the woman. The voice made the woman's face freeze. She turned around to look behind Gunan. A little girl, who was only about the waist of a normal person, walked out. She did not have the presence of a cultivator, but her face was cold. She had a red cloak on her back, which made her feel strangely oppressive. Yes, sorry to bother you. The woman did not dare say anything. She lowered her body and left. Fox, Shadow Song, who looked like a little girl, grunted in the direction of the woman's retreat. Gunan turned around to look at Shadow Song, who was behind him. Why are you here too? Someone might be watching us. It is safer to follow you. Shadow Song did not hide anything. You promised to protect me. Huh? Gunan gave her a friendly smile. A player's promise to an NPC was like a fart. If it was necessary, they could go back on their word. So, Gunan did not want to argue with her about whether or not he had actually promised her. In comparison, he was more concerned about something else. His eyes lit up with the fire of gossip. You came here to follow me. Won't Purple Lightning be jealous? You guys must have had a fight, right? Hey. Shadow Song looked at him angrily. What kind of relationship do you think we have? I have always treated you like a father. Gunan looked as if he had just realized something. He sighed and said, Oh, it is Ghost Father. If you wanted to read some light novels, go to Apex Novel Network. Chapter 230. Wulin Chinese Network. Travel through the sky to be an evil god. Latest chapter. As for the true relationship between Shadow Song and Violet Lightning, Gunan didn't get to the bottom of it. Of course, whether Shadow Song was angry or ashamed, Gunan did not believe a single word of it. Star Master's attitude toward others could only be judged by their actions. It cannot be judged by their words. Purple Civ Sky was a really big plane, but it was not very big. It was much smaller than a plane like Galaxy World. That was because Purple Civ Sky's space was special. It was different from the star worlds that Gunan had seen before. There were no planets or stars there. Above them was the sky, and below them was the ground. It was a place where the sky was round and the earth was round. You chased away the guide that came to your door. Are you ready to lead the way? Shadow Song patted his flat chest and said, "Every big organization has a base in purple civ sky. They will not move for tens of thousands of years. Where do you want to go? Just tell me." Gunan thought about it and said, "What is the best place to earn origin crystals?" Origin crystals were the currency used by Break World people and Star Masters. They might not be able to buy rare items, but they were worth a lot. Of course, it is Galaxy World Door. In front of a teleporter in purple civ sky, Gunan and Shadow Song's bodies emerged. Gunan was holding a blue orb. "Is this an origin crystal?" Gunan played with the orb in his hand. He looked curious. Even at the transcendent level, currency was not commonly seen. That was because most of the elites leveled up in different ways. They did not have a common goal, so it was difficult for currency to exist. Breaking World and above were different. At least at Break World and Star Master levels, they were chasing the same thing about the original of the world. But Break World people mainly observed and learned. Star Masters needed to absorb it. Origin crystals, as the name suggested, were crystals that were generated by the original of the world. Spirit crystals were very troublesome to create, and it required a lot of strength from the maker. Ordinary Star Lords couldn't even unseal it, let alone imitate it. Therefore, the purchasing power of origin crystals was slightly higher than its actual value, and the production process accounted for a considerable part of it. In addition to being a circulating currency, Spirit Stones could also be used to exchange for highly active world origin, which was the main way to cash Spirit Stones. Such a special currency system was the result of tens of thousands of years of development in the heavenly planes, and it was still used in the world today. The one in Gunan's hand was such an origin crystal, but it was of the smallest denomination and only contained one unit of origin source. In purple civ sky, Break World elites and Star Lords were not allowed to teleport. They had to go through purple civ sky's teleporter. The transfer array naturally had to be charged. Gunan hadn't even seen a source crystal before, so he naturally had to rely on the rich and imposing Shadow Song. By the way, why do you still have origin crystals on you after being sealed for so long? None of your business. Gunan could only shrug at Shadow Song's uncooperative attitude. But this little interlude didn't affect their arrival in the territory of a large organization. Astral Gate. Purple Civ Sky was a top neutral plane. Here, Gunan had even found a remote organization like Ming Lu. There was no need to even mention the Astral Gate. The Astral Gate was a famous organization in the heavenly planes, and it was famous for its openness. Anyone could join. Inside this organization, there was a mature trading system to ensure that members could trust each other. Even a small character like Land Marigold, after entering the Astral Gate, was able to use her own power to gain the appreciation of a Break World elite. That was enough to explain the problem. How could they ensure it? Simple. If they didn't follow the rules, they could just hunt them down and kill their entire race. Truly large organizations and forces basically used this method to ensure the loyalty of their members. After Gu Nan and Shadow Song exited the teleporter, they found themselves in a city. Countless people of different ranks walked the streets. Gunan looked around. There were cultivators and mortals mixed together. There was no difference. He even saw a Break World elite. Only an organization with an extremely high level of power could form such a structure. "I'm going to join the Astral Gate. Do you want to come?" Gunan looked at Shadow Song. "Of course. If I don't go with you, what if someone kidnaps me?" Shadow Song said, "Are you kidding me? And I am an 11-star member of the Astral Gate. I could take you along." The Astral Gate was a completely open organization, so it was very popular among the casual cultivators. Even Shadow Song had been there for a while. Shadow Song took Gu Nan to the main hall of the Astral Gate. It was just like what Gunan had seen in Tianji Dojo. Every space was divided into pieces. Gunan was used to this. He knew the interior of Shanghai Pavilion had to be like this. Tianji Dojo Master had learned this from there. "Welcome back, 11-star member Blood Song." Gunan and Shadow Song entered at the same time. They were separated into the same space. A soft female voice sounded in front of them. Change your code name, Shadow Song. Shadow Song's first words were to change her old code name. She did not explain why she was doing this, but Gunan could guess. She did not want the people from back then to know who she was now. Change of code name confirmed. Recorded. The gentle female voice quickly responded to Shadow Song's request. The voice sounded gentle and sweet, but the underlying tone didn't seem to change at all. Shadow Song was very familiar with the Astral Gate. Without pausing, she said, "Recommend a new member." However, the response from the Astral Realm Gate surprised her. Order confirmed. No suitable target detected. Welcome back, ordinary member, evil god. The last sentence was clearly meant for Gunan. Gunan had the experience of coming into contact with the Astral Gate when he was at the Third Order. He had left a record inside. Shadow Song was stunned. She immediately realized what had happened. She pointed at Gunan and laughed. Ha ha ha, ordinary member, an evil god. What a lame code name. Gunan was already used to Shadow Song's sudden actions, so he didn't take it to heart. He had just casually chosen a code name. It was not suitable to use it now. As his level grew higher, he might come into contact with people from the Pantheon world. Was using the code name Evil God not asking for trouble? Gunan glanced at Shadow Song. Can I change my code name as I please? I won't repeat it. Shadow Song was still in a state of hysterical laughter. She finally said, "You can change if you don't find it troublesome. It doesn't matter if it's repeated. The Astral Gate records your own loss." Gunan nodded. Change code name. Shadow Song's father. The laughter finally stopped. If you want to read some light novels, go to Chapter 231, Wallin Chinese Network. The newest chapter, Crossing the Sky and Becoming an Evil God. Welcome, Shadow Song's father. Because you're just an ordinary member, the mission list is temporarily closed. The gentle female voice echoed in the space of the Astral Gate. Shadow Song's face darkened. If her strength had recovered, she would have jumped up and broken Gunan's knees. Bastard, change your name. Look, I don't even have the authority to accept a mission. Help me level up first, Gunan said seriously. He came to the Astral Gate, or rather, Purple Civ Sky, to accept some missions and obtain spirit crystals to exchange for active world sources. This was what normal world breakers did. Gunan wanted to see what kind of response the Evil God Temple would give him. Gunan had an Astral Gate rank before, but that was when he was level 3. In the Astral Gate, the system before and after world breakers were completely different. The previous star ranks had to be converted. Gunan's star rank could only be converted to that of an ordinary member. Fortunately, he now had a noble 11-star member to recommend him. Shadow Song's face darkened. Are you sure you'll change your name after I recommend you? Of course. I always keep my word. I can't change my relative's name. No problem. A moment later, the new 5-star member, Gunan, chose to change his code name again. An 11-star member is really high class. He directly raised me to 5-star. Gunan muttered, change code name. Shadow Song's next-door neighbor, Uncle Wong. When they came out of the Astral Gate, Shadow Song's resentful eyes circled around Gunan's back. It was as if she wanted to poke a few holes in him. Gunan didn't take this to heart at all. He usually liked to do things in the most direct way, but that didn't mean he wouldn't do things in a roundabout way. He could just kill an NPC directly, so he didn't think there was a need to go around in circles. Moreover, the players were all good at making fun of people with these strange game IDs. After successfully becoming a 5-star member, Gunan's authority was indeed much higher. He easily found a mission that was more suitable for him to complete and had a good reward. Hunt down the traitor Embark. No matter how powerful an organization the Astral Gate was, it was inevitable that there would be rebellions. After all, when benefits were at the forefront, there would always be people who could not restrain their desires. Sinberg was an extraordinaire, and his strength was close to the level of a Dowlord. During a mission, he killed his companions, stole the mission item, and fled. Now, his whereabouts had already been locked by the Astral Gate, and he was in a small world. Guehai Shur. When Gunan stepped into this place with Shadow Song, he immediately felt that the name wasn't wrong. The Gosi world was a very special plane. It was similar to the Violet Civ Heaven in that it was a flat plane with no planets. However, the land here was a boundless sea of ghosts, with countless resentful souls roaming about. If one fell into it, it would be hard for a break-world person to survive. Whether it was a cultivator or a normal person, they could only live on a floating island in the sky above the ghost sea. Hello, mister. I am 6-star movement. Gunan and Shadow Song used a teleporter to descend. There were already people from the astral gate waiting there, so they quickly greeted them. It was not easy to lock on a Sinbird's location. There were 10 people standing in front of Gunan. The leader was a man wearing a black tuxedo. He was the one who had spoken. Among the members of the astral gate, low-level people would usually greet each other and report their level. This man with the codename Movement was already a 6-star member. Looking at his level, he was higher than Gunan. Of course, the ranks of extraordinaires could not compare to break-world people. Hello. Gunan nodded at everyone. I am Shadow Song's neighbor, Uncle Wong. This long list of names was easily announced by Gunan. Shadow Song, who was next to him, looked gloomy. Movement was frozen. Mr. Wong. Yes, this is Shadow Song. Gunan was very polite. He did not forget to introduce Shadow Song to everyone. A moment later, the hunting team, led by Yu Zhang, stood beside Gunan with awkward smiles on their faces. Gunan, on the other hand, was learning about the target's information with a serious expression. Sinbird's situation was also known in the Astral Gate, but it would not be as detailed as it was here. Sinbird was a westernized name. It meant he did not come from a big plane. In the world of worlds, only small planes had xenogeneic civilizations. It was rare to even see black and white people. The hunting team's information confirmed this. In fact, the Ghost Sea was Sinbird's home. That was why he had chosen to return there. He wanted to use the special terrain of the Ghost Sea to buy himself time. Buying time? Gunan finally raised his brows when he saw this and spoke. Yes, Movement said seriously. Sinbird betrayed the organization for a bottle of star water. After he betrayed us, his power improved very quickly. Last time I could not beat him. Movement was a true leader. Even with someone helping him, he could not beat Sinbird. That meant he was only one step away from breaking the world. He could break through at any time. It was no wonder that after the Astral Gate understood the situation, it assigned the task to the Breakers. They did not want to send a few leaders to kill him. But no matter how fast Sinbird's power improved, it was nothing to Gunan. He asked, "Where is the target now?" "Right now, we can only confirm that he is on one of the 3 floating islands," Movement said. He gave the names of the 3 floating islands. "We did not want to alert the enemy. Now that you are here, you can lock down the floating islands." Gunan nodded. Facing a target that he was not sure he could keep, he could not rush to close the net. "Tell the managers of the 3 floating islands to come see me," Gunan said quickly. "Lock down the floating islands. Do not allow anyone to leave." Yu Zhang and the others nodded in unison, but at this moment, a crisp voice sounded from the side. "No, we cannot lock down the floating islands." Gunan raised his head and looked over. A young girl with a frosty expression was walking quickly towards him. "Yu Zhang, have you forgotten what I told you?" The girl shouted at Yu Zhang as soon as she appeared. Her righteous expression made Lu Zhang feel a little ashamed. She even glanced at Gunan uneasily. If you lock down the floating islands for a long time, it will easily cause the ghost air to flow in. Then, the entire floating island will be destroyed. Which one of you can take responsibility for that? The girl did not hesitate to speak. She exposed the truth that Movement was hiding. "Is that so?" Gunan's voice sounded. His calm gaze made Movement even more uneasy. After all, he was indeed in the wrong. In order to complete the task, he had concealed the truth that he was going to commit a great sin. If the person in front of him thought that he had deliberately made him bear the sin of killing, he would not be able to wash himself clean even if he jumped into the Yellow River. The girl looked at this scene with satisfaction. She believed that the despicable Movement would get what he deserved. Yes, but Movement quickly opened his mouth. He seemed to want to find an excuse for himself, but he was interrupted by Gunan. "In that case, just lock down the 3 floating islands. Won't the target be dead?" Gunan said with a puzzled expression. "What a waste of time. Go to Apex Novel Network for reading light novels." Chapter 232. As soon as Gu Nan's voice fell, the whole scene seemed to fall silent. Whether it was Lu Zhang or the girl, they all looked at him as if they had seen a ghost. The two of them could not be blamed, as Gu Nan's words were too shocking. The girl stared at Gu Nan for a while, and finally realized that the guy in front of her was not joking. So she said fiercely, "Ridiculous." Then he quickly disappeared. Lu Zhang smiled awkwardly, surprised at the fierceness of this lord, but also very glad that he had come. If his character was too gentle, he was afraid that with the girl's identity, it would be easy to suppress him, and then there would be no hope for his mission. "It's not easy to seal off the floating island," Lu Zhang said with a wry smile. "After all, we need the help of the floating island's master. If we let them lock up their territory," Lu Zhang said with a wry smile, "then find someone from the other floating islands to do it." Gu Nan had a "you're so stupid" expression on his face. "We've killed the high-level forces of 3 floating islands, and there's a lot of good territory left. Don't tell me none of the other floating islands are tempted?" Lu Zhang was stunned again. He finally realized that the person in front of him really wanted to do this, even at the cost of provoking a war in the Sea of Ghosts. And from a practical point of view, it was not impossible. Lu Zhang quickly shook his head, throwing this terrible idea out of his head. He believed that he was not a person without a bottom line like the other party. In order to chase down a target, he would bury thousands of innocent people. At least, he would not do that unless it was absolutely necessary. However, Gu Nan's cold gaze fell straight on his face. "What other questions do you have?" The indifference in Gu Nan's eyes made Lu Zhang's heart feel as if it was being gripped by an invisible hand, and he was somewhat speechless. He knew that if he could not give a satisfactory answer, the other party was likely to turn hostile. Even if he would not kill due to the rules of the Astral Gate, it would certainly not be easy to bear. A drop of cold sweat appeared on Lu Zhang's forehead, but he hurriedly said, "Sealing the entire floating island is too inefficient and time-consuming. We already have some clues about the target. Why don't we give it a try first?" He finished his speech very quickly. Finally, Gu Nan was able to understand a little. Gu Nan nodded his head, indicating for him to continue. The movement breathed a sigh of relief. He was born in a sky-class plane. He had seen many world breakers, so he had some understanding of all kinds of cultivators. Some of the break world people were easy to get along with. They could even make friends with normal people. Some of them were so high up that they treated human lives like dirt. Lu Zhang believed that the person in front of him belonged to the latter, so he didn't use any righteous words to persuade him. Instead, he used the word efficiency. There were as many floating islands in the Ghost Sea as there were hairs on an ox, and they were of different sizes. Some were as big as a city in the astral realm, while some were as small as a few football fields. One could see the borders with a single glance. Gu Nan was now on a medium-sized floating island called Yintai, with Lu Zhang and the others, waiting for news. There were clues about Sinberg on all 3 floating islands. Some people had seen Sinberg, and so were even related to him. They didn't dare to alert him before, but now that Gu Nan was in charge, they could naturally go and test him. As long as Sinberg dared to show up on this floating island, Gu Nan could kill him in an instant. While they were waiting for news, Shadow Song naturally followed beside Gu Nan. She wasn't very interested in Gu Nan's mission. Instead, she was more interested in the girl from before. "What's the girl's name?" Shadow Song asked Lu Zhang excitedly. "She looks older than you." Before Lu Zhang could speak, Gu Nan answered, "I've lived for tens of thousands of years, but she still looks bigger than you. I mean breasts." Shadow Song turned his head with a dark face and stared fiercely at Lu Zhang. His stare made the young man's hair stand on end. He quickly explained the girl's origin. In fact, it wasn't complicated. The girl's name was Zhu Qin. She was also a member of the Astral Gate, but she wasn't a participant in this mission. Instead, she was a native of the Ghost Sea world. The Ghost Sea world was really a very small plane. When the people from the Astral Gate had just arrived, Zhu Qin was the first to notice it, and the two sides came into contact. This kind of situation was actually not uncommon. After all, there were Astral Gate members in all the major planes. When someone went here to do a mission, sometimes their companions would also help. Of course, there might be counterproductive situations. Zhu Qin was an example. She held a rather uncooperative attitude toward the operation of Lu Zhang and the others this time. For example, when Lu Zhang wanted to lightly seal off a certain floating island, she strongly opposed it. Zhu Qin's opposition wasn't a joke. She had a solid foundation. She was just an ordinary extraordinary, but her identity wasn't simple at all. To put it simply, she was the little princess of the Ghost Sea world. Although the Ghost Sea world wasn't big, it also had a government group, and it was a feudal empire. The current king was Zhu Qin's biological father, so she could be considered a princess in name only. The princess of this broken place is useless, right? Shadow Song wasn't stupid. She knew that for an organization like the Astral Gate, Zhu Qin's identity was nothing. Lu Zhang had a wry smile, but before he could speak, someone next to him said, "It's because she has a good sister." This was the same as Lu Zhang. He was a member of the team who had come to carry out the mission. Clearly, he had a lot of resentment toward Zhu Qin for blocking his way. Her sister is a world breaker, but she isn't a member of the organization, Lu Zhang added. This was the real answer. World breaker. During the mission, the Astral Gate would protect the members who were carrying out the mission. But what about when the mission ended? If Zhu Qin didn't like one of them and wanted her sister to teach them a lesson, then their team would be in trouble. Plus, Zhu Qin's sister was from the Ghost Sea world. If their team stirred up trouble there and made a world breaker unhappy, they might not be on their side. Fortunately, Gunan had come. Only a break world being could not care less about Zhu Qin. Only a break world being able to do anything to capture Sinberg. Why isn't she cooperating? Gunan stroked his chin. His question wasn't a question. It sounded like he was talking to himself. Protect the environment? Save the world? Doesn't seem like it. After listening to Lu Zhang's story, Gunan wasn't concerned about Zhu Qin's sister. He was concerned about something else. Go and find out what happened to Enberg in the past few years. See if he had anything to do with Zhu Qin, Gunan said to Lu Zhang. Or check on her sister and Enberg. When Gunan said this, his eyes fell into the distance. He looked cold. Chapter 233. The probe on Yintai floating island soon came to a conclusion. Unsurprisingly, there weren't any valuable clues. What Sinberg left behind here was that he once had a one-night stand with a female student. But Sinberg didn't make the slightest move even after movement's people kidnapped the female student. Capture that female student, chop off 2 fingers, and send them to her parents. Tell them you kidnapped her for ransom and make a big deal out of it, Gunan said calmly. The Ghost Sea was a feudal society, so the level of technology wasn't low. The 3 floating islands that Sinberg was suspected to be on were all in the same area. If they made a big deal out of it here, he wouldn't have to worry about not getting some information. It would be best if they could alert Sinberg, but it didn't matter if they couldn't. It was just a casual move. Movement quickly ordered people to do it. His mind was more focused on what Gunan had said before about the relationship between Sinberg, Zhu Qin, and even her sister. Thinking about it carefully, it really wasn't impossible. The clues on the other 2 floating islands still needed some preparation before they could really start probing. So, Gunan and Shadow Song temporarily separated from Movement's team. That Zhu Qin, do you really think she has something to do with the target? Shadow Song walked around Gunan, asking all sorts of questions. I can't rule out that possibility, Gunan said after thinking for a moment. But it has nothing to do with you, right? I'm also here to do a mission. Why doesn't it have anything to do with me? Gunan used these 2 words to express his attitude clearly. Okay. Shadow Song put on an indifferent look. Then what are you going to do next? Wait for further information? Faced with this question, Gunan just shook his head. Shadow Song's eyes kept sizing him up. All of Gunan's expressions, movements, eyes, and even the small, unconscious movements of his body were captured by her. This descendant of the blood ancestor had passed through generation after generation, but his will was still no different from that of the first generation. Of course, she didn't come to follow Gunan just for fun. Gunan's strange performance in the world of heroes also aroused Shadow Song's interest. She wanted to know what was so special about Gunan. There must be some sort of consideration for that person to send him to his side. Perhaps her goal could be read from Gunan. Since there might be a problem with Zhu Qin, why don't we just ask her directly? Gunan gave such an answer. On a floating island in the Ghost Sea, in an exquisite villa in the central city. Zhu Qin pushed open the door and walked in with quick steps. Her face was cold as if she was owed $5 million and hadn't returned it. Of course, with her status, it would be easy for her to be owed $5 million. Bastard. Idiot. Psycho. As soon as Zhu Qin walked into the villa, she immediately flew into a rage and fiercely smashed everything around her. How can there be such a person? The room wasn't empty. There was already a young man and a woman there. Seeing Zhu Qin like this, the man smiled faintly and said, "What's going on? Who dares to provoke our little highness and make him so angry?" Zhu Qin glared at him and snorted heavily. "Another person from our organization has come, and it's a madman. He said that all 3 floating islands are sealed." "There's such a person?" The man couldn't help but laugh and shake his head. "What a fantasy. Big Brother Xin made the right decision to leave your organization early." The woman beside him also smiled and said, "Little Qin, your organization is really interesting. Just a random person can seal off 3 floating islands?" This made Zhu Qin frown slightly. She wanted to refute, but she didn't know where to start. These 2 people were her half-brother Zhu Wan and his fiancée Yin Xuexin. They were also cultivators with extraordinary strength. However, the 2 of them came from a small place like the Ghost Sea, so their vision naturally couldn't be very high. Zhu Qin, on the other hand, had her sister's guidance and joined the Astral Gate early on. Only then did she know how big the outside world was. The person she met today was indeed a madman, but the Astral Gate wasn't a simple organization. It was a true colossus. Thinking that Brother Xin had betrayed the organization and was still being hunted, Zhu Qin felt an inexplicable sense of irritation. Zhu Wan and Yin Xuexin naturally didn't understand Zhu Qin's thoughts. However, they were wholeheartedly giving advice and suggestions. "Little Qin, if your organization keeps sending people over, Brother Xin will be exposed sooner or later." Zhu Wan became serious and said in a low voice, "Why don't we do something?" "Absolutely not." Zhu Qin was shocked and hurriedly interrupted Zhu Wan. Her attitude was even more resolute than before. After all, stopping Lu Zhang was out of her sense of social responsibility. Stopping Zhu Wan was purely because she didn't want to die. It was fine if they didn't cooperate, but if they openly obstructed the Astral Gate's operation, they would provoke the organization's revenge. Zhu Qin even regretted letting her brother and sister-in-law get to know Brother Xin. They couldn't help much, but the trouble they caused could be fatal. Zhu Wan and Yin Xuexin didn't agree with Zhu Qin's cautiousness. Yin Xuexin laughed and said, "Little Qin, you don't spend much time here. Don't underestimate yourself." "That's right." Zhu Wan put down the wine glass in his hand. He looked excited. "All these years, the things I brought back have helped our overall power. It is something you can't even imagine." Zhu Wan, it was Zhu Qin's big sister. She was a genius world breaker from the Ghost Sea. With her identity as a world breaker, it was not difficult for her to help her hometown. "Little Qin, don't forget," Zhu Wan said. "Brother Xion's genius is Lian Xiao. I approve of him." Zhu Wan tried his best to persuade Zhu Qin, hoping she would agree to help. She wouldn't be like she was now, where she only dared to secretly report. He didn't expect a shadow had secretly come to the villa. "Your paranoia is really accurate." Shadow Song's voice sounded. It wasn't so much a compliment to Gunan's accuracy, but it was more of a mockery. Zhu Qin and the others suddenly turned around. They saw Gunan and Shadow Song standing calmly at the door. Zhu Qin recognized Gunan. Her face changed as she said, "It's you. Humph. Do you think you can force us to tell you where Brother Xin is by finding us?" With her big sister as her shield, Zhu Qin wasn't afraid of the people from the Astral Gate making things difficult for her. Zhu Wan, who was at the side, was even more fearless. He firmly believed that in his own Gue High Shi's territory, foreign organizations would have to coil first even if they were dragons. So, he slowly said, "I wonder if you..." Before Zhu Wen's voice could reach them, a black shadow suddenly jumped out. It split into three and went for the three of them. Zhu Wen and Yin Shuexin didn't even have the chance to make a sound as they were directly engulfed by the black shadows. Zhu Qin similarly didn't have the time to react, but the pendant in front of her chest lit up with white light, gradually revealing the figure of a woman. Chapter 234. Wulin Chinese Network, the latest chapter of crossing the heavens and becoming an evil god. Inside Zhu Qin's villa, Zhu Wen and Yin Shuexin were already completely lifeless. After being engulfed by Gunan's shadow power, there was no way they could survive. Zhu Qin, who was not much stronger than them, did not die instantly. Instead, she was protected by the pendant in front of her chest. With just a thought, she could block Gunan's attack. Her identity was self-evident. This woman was Zhu Qin's sister, world breaker Zhu Yuxiang. This break-world person was not an ordinary person. She had straight hair that reached her waist. She was wearing white clothes. Even her skin looked pale. If there was anything to describe her, it would be the word female ghost. Zhu Qin, on the other hand, was already used to her elder sister's appearance. The moment she saw her elder sister appear, she immediately shouted, "Elder sister, it's this person. He's here to look for brother Xin." After saying this, Zhu Qin looked at Gunan with a slightly smug expression. This kind of expression was like two children fighting, and one side suddenly saw their parents coming and immediately became fearless. What Zhu Qin didn't expect was that the person standing in front of her was also an adult, and he was here for her family's adult. Zhu Xiang, who looked like a female ghost. He looked at Gunan cautiously. With her experience, it was impossible for her to not recognize the other party after personally exchanging blows with him. "Who are you?" His voice seemed to have come from the nine hells, and there was a coldness that was hidden deep in his bones. Seeing as she was willing to help her hometown and her family, she was not a heartless person. After all, she had just leveled up not too long ago. Gunan did not say anything. His heart was beating slightly. The spell Breaker attribute had been completely activated. Zhu, the one who had descended through her sister, was only a clone, but the strange undulations on Gunan's body still made her immediately alert. But her vigilance was useless. After a dozen years in the fairy demon world, Gunan was back to his best condition. Facing a new break world clone, his breaking power was almost invincible. Only to see Zhu, traces of ghost chi began to rise around her, but Gunan just casually stretched out his hand and grabbed, directly grabbing all her ghost chi, and even Zhu Yeshio, all the doppelgangers were captured at the same time. Gunan holds Zhu Xiang in place with one hand. The clone's neck asked calmly, "Where is Embark?" "Zhu." The doppelganger's eyes were still cold. After all, it was just a doppelganger. Even though she could see that his strength was far above hers, she still tried to communicate with Gunan. In her opinion, the people from the Astral Gate were not so stubborn. As long as there were enough benefits and risks, they would make the right choice. "Sir," however, Gunan only used one sentence to stop Zhu Xiang. All the words, "If you don't tell me, I'll kill your whole family." Embark was a mixed-race child. His mother was white, so he was half white. Perhaps it was because of this white blood that he was taller than his peers since he was young. His skin was also whiter, and even the color of his pupils was lighter. At this time, Embark was sitting leisurely in his home. There was a glass of blood-red fruit wine in front of him, and he was drinking it by himself. Of course, he knew that the people from the Astral Gate were after him. He had already expected this from the moment he killed his companions and took away the Star Water. The Astral Gate is indeed a large organization that can move freely in the heavens. It's really difficult. Embark drank another mouthful of fruit wine and muttered to himself with a headache. Very few people knew that this was not the first time Embark had done this kind of thing. It could be said that his history of success was constantly joining various large organizations. Then, when there was a suitable mission target, he would suddenly betray them and conveniently take away extremely valuable resources. In the heavens, there were many people like Embark, but there were also many who died. This was a real high-risk industry. However, Embark also had his own reliance. That was, he had a wide network of people, and he could always find people who were willing to help him. Of course, Sinberg was not stupid enough to find the same people to help him every time. In fact, this was the first time he had used his hometown. If everything goes well, with the help of the star water, I will be able to break the world soon enough. Then, Sinberg was drinking fruit wine. There was not much alcohol in it, but his eyes started to blur. Sinberg's eyes were blurred. After all, he had been walking on the edge of life and death for many years. The moment his consciousness became depressed, his whole body woke up. His heart was filled with danger. To be able to make him fall silently. And it was such a familiar method. Sinberg had a wry smile on his face. When he woke up, he found that all the arrangements he had made near his house had been instantly broken by someone. I did not expect this. Sinberg turned his head to look to the side. There were 4 people slowly walking over. One of them was Zhu Xiang. Of the 4 people, Sinberg only recognized 2. Aside from Zhu Xiang, there was also his sister, Zhu Qin. The other 2 people were a white-clothed young man and a man in a black tuxedo. To be more accurate, there were 5 people. On the left side of the white-clothed young man was a little girl. To be exact, there were 5 people. On the left side of the white-clothed young man was a little girl. Embark was very clear that these 2 people were most likely from the astral gate. He used the words, "I did not expect this," to express all his thoughts. Zhu Xiang was helping the astral gate. He really did not expect this. Was the astral gate really that powerful? Sinberg did not have much time to think. He saw the white-clothed young man say to the side, "Is he Sinberg? Can you confirm it?" The man in the tuxedo next to him respectfully said, "His appearance and presence match. If we can capture him alive and let the organization confirm it, that would be great." But Sinberg sneered. The people from the astral gate were too arrogant. Lianzhu, they all knew they had to do it in secret. That was the only way to get close to him. Why did these people not understand that? He did not have the power to face a break-world being, but it was not impossible to escape from a break-world being. Sinberg took out a small bottle from somewhere and threw it on the ground. The person next to Gu Nan was undoubtedly Yizhang. When he saw Sinberg's action, he was shocked. Not good. That is the remnant of the star water. The star water was an extremely unstable high-energy substance. If it was thrown like this, it would immediately explode violently. Under Yu Zhang's astonished gaze, Gu Nan suddenly took a step forward, grabbed the small bottle with one hand, and then crushed it. The star water splashed, but under the absolute isolation of the break world's power, it was like an ordinary potion, slowly dripping on the ground. Drip, drip. The sound of the liquid dripping was particularly clear in the silent scene. Zhu Qin covered her mouth, trying hard not to cry out, but her eyes were filled with pain. Zhu Xiang could not help but shake his head gently, as if he felt sorry for Sinberg. As for Sinberg himself, he fell into deep despair. If you want to read a refreshing novel, go to Apex Novel website.